Will start my recording.
I'm going to record too.
I'm going to turn Maura up. Maura, can you hear the feedback of the heater that's running just before I start?
A heater running on your end?
Yeah.
Nope.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? So we have lots of people here. Tara's here. Hello.
Oh, hi, Tara.
Welcome everyone to our grammar and mechanics class. You may have noticed that we took a two-part class and we split it into 3 parts, and that's because grammar will make your head explode. So we don't want that to happen. It makes our head explode. So it's just a little easier to take in parts. And this is the class where I would say we've kind of done the best job teaching you the way we teach kids. So you will be expected to do some hands-on work. So make sure you have some pencils and erasers handy. And why might we need erasers, Maura?
We might be making some mistakes.
We might.
As
certainly
we always
Maura and
do.
I will be.
We always do, of course, when we're being recorded in a live class. Occasionally make some errors.
Crazy. We write silly stuff. What did I say one time? Instead of I like to try to do a past tense of a word big or something like big. I don't know, something really dumb. That's like, yes, I do know better than that. But also you might want to have some Post-it notes around, things like that, because we are going to have you doing some of the work with us. Happy New Year from Toronto. Hello to Toronto. And we have some people from all over. I don't know if we have anyone else outside of the country other than Canada. Often we do, but we don't know who's joining us today versus who bought the class. So,
can I do some housekeeping things?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so in addition to Post-it notes and pencils, if any of you read through the emails that I sent ahead of time, it would be great if you have printed off the instructional plan document that we sent. It's better to have it printed than to just be looking at it as a document, because grammar should be very hands-on. That's part of what we'll be showing you today. You will better comprehend things if you can be marking along with the kinds of sentences and things that we're learning. We have a whole kind of marking, a multisensory system that we'll be teaching you. So be great, as we want to teach our learners, if you could be as engaged in the process in a multisensory, you doing it way. That will be a great model for how you then can go take it to your kids or your students. Additionally, we sent kind of late, about an hour ago, a second handout that I believe was called Building Parts of Speech. That's something that we'll be referencing today, and I just want to make sure all of you saw it, because it was kind of the last email I sent somewhere around 12 o'clock. So that would be another one to print out. We will be referencing today. Post-it notes, we will use a little bit. So if you have some of those, you can use them. If not, you can just write things in. It's not that big of a deal. Have Post-it notes. Yeah, draw boxes or something like that. And then I want to tell you a couple things about Zoom.
Can I say one more thing? You might have said this. Sorry, I was looking. That we will be using our grammar bugs. Did you mention that?
I didn't, but they don't necessarily have those. So I was
right. If you have the Grammar Bugs program and you have some bugs in front of you, you might want to have those with you. Also, many of you have also purchased the Big Bugs Grammar 1, 2, or 3 curriculum, and for your convenience, not as a selling point as much as for your convenience, we will be referencing overlap between what we are teaching and where you would find that in the Bugs program.
Right. So it's not necessary material for you to have today, but it is something we'll reference now and again and show you how we might teach things on the manipulative bug metaphor that we have. So that'll be modeled for you if you're thinking, oh, I'd like that. You can create this kind of manipulative type thing on Post-its, or we have the manipulatives for you available on the website for purchase. For Zoom, if you're new to Zoom, as many of you are already taking advantage of the chat, so feel free to be talking to each other and asking questions in the chat as we go. Generally, though, for more involved content-related questions, they're a little bit easier for us to keep track of if you type them in the Q&A folder, which is an option at the bottom or top of your screen. For me, all my little options come up at the bottom. If you hover on your screen, there's a little folder that says Q&A, and if you click on that, you can type questions in there. We will be sure to go through any questions that are typed in the Q&A at the end, or kind of maybe throughout. But questions in the chat, we might see and we might not. So if you're like, this is a question I need answered, put that in the Q&A folder and we will get to it at some point. We will occasionally glance at the chat and answer things from the chat, but that's going to be more conversation based because we can't track everything happening in the chat because it kind of keeps scrolling up.
The chat needs to say to all panelists.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah, Claire had mentioned at the top of the chat. So when you're writing in the chat, make sure where you are typing your message, there's a little place that says to, and then it says all panelists or all panelists and attendees. There's a little drop down menu. You want that selected on all panelists and attendees. I think it defaults to all panelists. So everyone in the class double check that you have it selected to all panelists and attendees. That way, anything you type, everyone can see. If it stays on panelists, only we will see it. So you might be trying to talk or say something to someone else and they cannot see what you've typed.
So we have people, I don't know if everyone saw this, if it said all attendees, but we have someone from New Zealand, the UK, Canada, and what did I miss? Is that it?
I see UK,
and then of course all over the US, many states all over the US. So it's always nice. Some of you are, wanting to head to bed at the end of this grammar class. So we all might feel that way, no matter what the time zone is. So we'll see.
I have one more thing to mention about the instructional plan that you've printed out. There is a glossary of terms that we'll be using. We'll try to explain things in terms that we use as we go, which we learned recently is called a glossed term if you explain it as soon as you mention the term. So we will be glossing terms for you as we teach, but also if you're like, wait, I missed what that was, it is in the glossary, and you can find your glossary on page 48 to 51. Those are your glossary pages. And then also your instructional handout includes an answer key to all of the sample sentences and things we'll be marking up and talking about as we go. If there's one that you didn't get to, and we won't be doing all of them that are listed on there. So
some will be given us homework.
Some will be given us homework. Some we'll be doing together. Some we might skip. So any sentence that appears in here, though, has the answers in the back, according to our marking system that we'll teach you on page 38 to 47. However, we do encourage you to try to mark things up yourself as the educator, and kind of see what you know and figure out where your holes, where your questions are before you're just kind of checking on answers in the back. Again, that's part of being very functional, part of kind of digging into this yourself, and it also gives you a much better awareness of the kinds of things that are solid and the kinds of things that aren't so much. So
and it gets us used to being confused, which is a common state while working with grammar. So
yep, you want to get very used to being confused.
Right.
We are going to try to unconfuse you as much as we can and not confuse ourselves in the process.
Right. Yeah. So we had learned that grammar, the English language is influenced predominantly by German. And it was a Germanic language. And then, some of you may know from history, there's this point where the French, William the Conqueror, conquered London and started influencing French coming into the language. And then we had this Renaissance, and there's more Latin coming into the language, and all of that influences a lot of our word study and vocabulary. But the structure of our language has undergone a lot of changes, but our grammar system was based in Latin. And so a lot of times we're trying to, shoehorn some of these words into some of these categories that just don't seem to fit very well. And that does lead to part of our confusion. Someone's commenting on my coffee cup.
She says she always looks forward to seeing what coffee cup you will be using.
You know, I really appreciate that you say that because I select my coffee cups so carefully.
I didn't get my super fun new coffee cup.
I just gave Maura a really good coffee cup.
No, it wasn't that one. Actually, though, that is a good one. Sorry. I was thinking of,
Okay, never mind.
I was
Obviously,
thinking
I don't
of,
choose good coffee cups.
no, you do. I have that one too. But I had bought my husband a really funny one. Yours wasn't a funny one.
Okay.
Yours was a pretty one. But
I think we have a grammar one somewhere that
we have a grammar mug?
that one. We need to get that. Oh yeah, it has pens in it.
Someone else has a grammar mug?
Well, I didn't like holding it. See, here's the thing. Your mug has to hold all 4 fingers. That's my criteria. I don't know how everyone else feels about this.
Huh. I do not have that same criteria.
Anyway, and so here I am not holding it that way. But Michelle, we are kindred spirits. I want you to also know, did you talk about pinning for when we put on the document cameras?
No, I didn't. Yeah, we will occasionally be showing things under a document camera, which allows you to kind of see our workspace instead of our faces for manipulatives and marking sentences. And if you're struggling to see what is on the document camera, because it'll sort of flip back and forth what your view is depending on who's talking. So if I'm showing something on the document camera, but Rita starts talking, your camera will flip to her. And so if you want to basically make the screen you're seeing control what screen you're seeing in large view, you can, if you hover kind of up top, you should see. Well, it depends on what view they're looking at right now. Make sure you are on the speaker view so that you're seeing whoever's talking kind of big instead of both of us maybe next to each other, unless you like it that way. But there's 3 of us because Claire is kind of connected on here as well. So if you're looking at those kind of miniature screens and you sort of hover over them, you should get some blue options. There's like 3 blue dots, and if you click on those blue dots, you get a couple options, and one of them says to pin video. So you can at any time pin whichever video you'd like to kind of remain on your screen large so that you can control that and it's not sort of flicking all over the place. I don't know if that bothers you or not, but you have control over which video you're seeing in large scale at any point. And you can also then unpin it. If you hover on those 3 dots again and click, it'll say unpin video, and you can go back to kind of the default of Zoom deciding what you see. Sorry, I'm just looking in the chat, the conversation about New Zealand. Is New Zealand faring okay right now? Because I know Australia is going through those horrible wildfires and New Zealand is nearby. So how is
New Zealand have some earthquakes, I think, or no, volcanoes?
I know they had some volcanoes a little while ago.
Right.
I didn't know if that was there another one recently? I don't know. Maybe I had.
We won't let mere wildfires and volcanoes deter us, Val. We would love to come to New Zealand. So we are rooted in language. We didn't really say that. My name's Rita Savasco.
I did not say that. I
was going to let you.
I don't know. You start talking for me so often. I have no idea what you're going to say and what you're not going to say. You introduce me. It's totally fine.
Well, this is Maura Krasnowski. She is my daughter, fellow SLP, fellow colleague at Rooted in Language. In the room with me are Tracy Molitors and Claire Baker. Claire often is teaching with us as well. Tracy's heart and soul is in this grammar class, and a lot of blood and sweat, my tears, are in the class. Tracy has put together this huge document that you have before you, which could practically be a book, and she has spent countless hours creating that glossary and the answers for you and all of that. So she has really put a lot into this. Periodically, you'll see me look off into space and ask a question and then get an answer. That's because I'm checking in with Tracy. She's my resident grammarian. So Maura, what we want to start with is at Rooted in Language, we believe in having a using explicit practice and teaching to help kids understand reading and writing in the most functional way. And grammar has a huge impact in our language development, not only developing how we speak, but it impacts what we understand. impacts our writing and our reading comprehension. So we really can't say enough about it. And hopefully this class will help you see how really important it is and why we get started with it with kids right away. So we have some basic teaching principles that Maura is going to review with you. And maybe Claire could answer some of those questions that are going on.
Claire could help.
Yeah. And turn to page 4 of your handout, and Maura is going to get you started just reviewing a few of our teaching principles that hopefully you're going to see reflected in this class.
All righty. So page 4. Yep. Sorry. Angela was not seeing the blue dots, so I'm going to have Claire kind of help her problem.
Okay.
On your page 4, we have a bunch of what we call rooted principles or rooted in language teaching principles. There are 8 on that page, and probably over the years we'll come up with many more. But these are sort of basic ones we talk about all the time. If you're new to us, I wanted to review, I'm not going to go through every single one on this page. We do recommend that you read them all because they our teaching style and the way in which we believe education happens best is kind of rooted in these principles on this page. No pun intended, or perhaps intended. And I'm going to go over 1 and 2 because they are big ones we talk about all the time. The first one is we call teaching to a level of success. And that's basically the idea that learning happens best when you are engaged in some process that is successful for you in some way, and learning does not happen when it's just constant failure. And if you think of your own life and your own experiences, you know, that should ring true for you. If you've ever tried something and you spent the whole time not getting it, you probably were less likely to want to try it again, and you also probably felt bad at it, and you also probably didn't feel like you learned anything. So we know that we can have students who are kind of all across the spectrum of learning challenge to gifted, right? You can have typical learners, and our successes and failures may kind of come as a surprise depending on, you know, the kid. Every child is different. But if you are teaching something and your student is not successful, we either are teaching in such a way that is not making sense for them, or maybe we're giving them too much, or there could be many factors causing the unsuccess or failure, or whatever we want to say. So we want to try to adjust and teach alongside them and be as multisensory as possible, and facilitate and support such that they can experience success as they're learning, so that they feel like they're learning something. They will remember more what we teach if we can help make it successful. And we have this little phrase we say at the bottom, which is that we kind of have this pattern of teaching called I do it, we do it, we do it, we do it, you do it. So the I do it, we do it, you do it sort of indicates that, you know, we show them, we do a lot of modeling. That's the I do it as the educator. And then we do it together. We provide support so that they can experience success, but also be involved in doing whatever task you're learning. And the we do it process is repeated quite a bit, especially for struggling learners, even more, so that they can be experiencing that success, and they may need that for longer if they're a struggling learner, before we are then asking them to independently do it. And a lot of times in schooling across America and across the world, the we do it is skipped, and you get kind of the I do it, now you do it. So we really believe in that we do it portion is where
it's only one.
Sorry,
it's only one we do it. Just one example or 2 examples. And really, for a lot of our struggling learners in particular, they might have months and years of we do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Maura.
Exactly. So the, you know, we really believe in the we do it being where that success is experienced most likely, and may need to last longer for some of your students. And that's going to be where a lot of the good learning happens. Our second principle, we say, no one learns to swim by drowning, is kind of a pithy little phrase that I believe Rita came up with many, many years ago, which is a similar idea that piggybacks off of the first one, which is kind of the opposite. So learning happens in success. If there is no success and there's constant failure, you won't be learning. So if I need to learn to swim and the method was to toss me in a pool, then it's not going to go so well. I am certainly in the situation I need to be in to learn to swim, but I didn't gain any necessary skills first before I was asked to do the task, right? And I wouldn't learn to swim if I'm just floundering. And then we often also say on the kind of flip side of that, that you don't really learn to swim if you are floating on a raft either. So that's kind of the opposite, which is sometimes we can be so afraid of letting kids kind of be in that learning zone of development that we kind of do too much for them. And there's a difference between doing everything for them and not doing anything for them. That's that we do it where we want to live kind of our best teaching lives for a long time, is that we're asking them to do some, we're supporting what's really hard for them, but they still have kind of a job and have to be digging into some of those areas that may be a little tricky for them, but we support enough that it doesn't feel like failure, okay? I'm gonna skip down to number 6 and 7 because these are really relevant for the grammar class in particular. Number 6 says that we always want to engage the learner by working on a clear and defined output, and you get a lot of that happening in grammar. I think we posted about this on our social media a couple days ago because it's a rooted principle that really comes up in any teaching situation, teaching and learning situation. So we encourage deep learning, meaning it's really in there, and you know students remember it, it's sticky for them by learning or by actively completing activities, goals, and outputs as we teach. So if kids can be kind of physically somehow engaged in creating something as you're teaching, like they're having to, you know, taking notes is kind of a basic level of this, right? Where you are engaged in creating something in front of you as you're learning, right? That's kind of where it ends up looking like the output when you're in at the college level or even the high school level. You know, your output you're creating anytime a teacher is lecturing is hopefully notes, right? We want to be doing as much of this as we can with kids, and it doesn't always have to look like notes. We have these language arts binder pages that we're involved in creating some kind of reference page as we're teaching. Kids are involved in doing that with us, led by us, but done by kids, right? You can be making charts, you can be making graphs, they can be writing things on Post-it notes, some kind of output. It doesn't have to be a finished project every time. Some things you teach might end up resulting in finished projects, but some kind of created thing that the child is responsible for contributing to is important for deep learning. And then that I mentioned the language arts binder, that's our number 7 that we have written on there. Building a language arts binder is kind of our way of having, you know, kind of that created output thing always sort of be a part of the learning, is we have kids create their own reference material as we teach, and it all goes into a binder in kind of this organized way so that they're both creating an output as they're learning and then also understanding a lot about how to use resources, how to look things up when you can't remember. It becomes this kind of second brain for them to help hold a lot of pieces of information we're asking them to begin to coordinate. They're not going to be perfect. So of course we need places to look back and remind ourselves of things that are kind of tricky and we need to kind of keep reviewing, etc. And the language arts binder is kind of our way of doing that. If you're wondering more about how we do that and what's our whole process and what all do we put in a language arts binder, we have a whole class that teaches on the language arts binder. And I could not even tell you when our next language arts binder class would be, or is that one only a recording, Claire?
Yeah, we are selling the recording, but
yeah, we're selling the recording right now on our website. So you could go check that out and look at that if you're interested in the LA binder process. As we go through this class, Rita mentioned the that there's some overlap with this manipulative curriculum or kind of manipulative instruction and activities that we sell called our Big Bug Grammar curriculum. And in the Big Bug Grammar curriculum, we have pages that particularly specifically can go in students' LA binders, and we sort of note that with these little squid symbols that we call inklings at the top of
they are octopuses. I always call them squids.
I thought they were squids.
Poor Claire is like, that is an octopus.
You, our followers, really care. I don't know that they do. Anyway.
It's the ink thing makes me think squid. That's my problem. They do too? I thought only squid did.
Well, anyway, so I'm not sure I needed to be interrupted for that, but there is a little picture of some tentacled creature that is that we call inklings, and those are sort of mark the pages that can be LA Binder pages in
You will
our
see
grammar.
these.
You'll see them as
We'll
we
show
go
them to you.
today. And that's in our grammar bug curriculum. They're not on your instructional packet, but I think that is everything I was going to say.
Yes. So I am going to try to pin myself.
I don't think pinning yourself will show anyone but you that
I
pin.
was hoping for video purposes, but
It only pins it for yourself, though.
Okay. All right. I was just hoping that they would have the full screen when I put on my document camera, which I am about to do. So let me just tell you a couple things. I am on page 5 now of your instructional plan. And what I want to do is just give you an overview of why we are going to teach in the order we teach. So this isn't random. You know, over the years working with kids. So I started working with kids in 1984. And in the beginning, if I was working with a child's grammar at all, it was what we called syntax, their underlying structural language for their verbal language system. It was only if they had a language delay and in their own verbal system, they had errors. I was never working on it in reading and writing, except I would try to help kids edit. And it was difficult to always know how to explain to them what was going on. Over the years, I started realizing the more I was working with reading and writing, I started appreciating how much more kids needed this very explicit teaching in grammar, and not just for editing. What I started to realize is it has a huge impact on reading comprehension. Now, some of you are also signed up for our reading comprehension class, which is in February. And, you know, I'm going to start out that class acknowledging that if you're really looking for reading comprehension, make sure you take our grammar class. Know as you're working on grammar, it's not just for writing and editing. It also is for comprehension, as I think you will see as we go along. But this is a really, really critical piece that we work on. And so over the years, I was working with kids and I would try to support their classroom work. And there's a lot of classical homeschool groups that do a lot of grammar work. And some of my kids are in parochial schools that have strong grammar programs, and they all teach the same way. They start with parts of speech. That's how they start. And that's what I was doing with my kids. And I had a couple resources that I like, and I'm going to show you a few of them in my document camera here. And I'm going to explain to you, I'm going to kind of take you through some of what happened when I was working with students and why I now teach in the way I teach. Okay, so I started out, I was influenced by Brave Writer, great resource that Julie referred me to, Nitty Gritty Grammar, and More Nitty Gritty Grammar. That's such a hard name to say. And this is basically just a reference book, but it has funny comics in it, and it has some nice sentence examples. And what I found was they were nice little references for me to pull out with my kids when I was working with them. And, you know, it gave me some sentence ideas to give examples, and my kids like the comics, and, you know, it's just very readable and user friendly. Okay, so that's always a good thing to have on your bookshelf. The other thing, this is in the field of speech path. We reference some of the information in this quite often. This is called the Syntax Handbook. It's really, again, mostly a reference book, but it has a nice little summary of different ages and stages in which kids learn different levels of grammar. And again, very readable, not too hard. You can get bogged down, again, in a lot of the parts of speech, but everything's pretty doable, lots of white space, you know, not too bad. Then I had heard about a program by Michael Clay Thompson, Grammar Island, Grammar Town, Grammar Voyage, and there's one more called The Magic Lens, okay? I liked the way this looked. I liked the way it worked. It's still become a halfway decent reference for kids. A lot of people who take our classes like to have this on hand. They like to read it and use it to help teach themselves a little bit more or reinforce what we talk about. Basically, what he does is he has this method that is a 4-level of analysis method, okay? And the way the 4-level of analysis works, I'm going to show you here in a minute.
Are you going to show that first?
Yep. I'm going to show this because I'm going to explain why we teach instead in the order we teach, okay? So basically the way the 4-level analysis works for Michael Clay Thompson in his program is first you analyze the parts of speech. So my sentence is, understanding grammar is challenging. In this sentence, this is actually a gerund, but for the purposes of just being basic, it's a type of noun. Here is a noun.
Can I just say, we will be teaching you a lot of these terms and how to find some of these things later on. This is not teaching, she's just demoing.
Not teaching, I'm just demonstrating. So do not panic if you don't know what I'm talking about, okay? This would be a verb and this would be an adjective. Okay, now, first of all, in order to do that analysis, you need to know what all of that is. And so right there, we have a problem with a lot of our struggling learners and many learners. And also, we have terms here that may not mean a lot to kids. Adjective, what does that mean? How is that related to noun? How did we get that term? Okay. Then the next thing you're supposed to analyze is the part of the sentence. So I'm, again, supposed to have some understanding that this is the subject. This is my, actually it's called a linking verb. And this is a subject complement. Again, don't worry, we're going to talk about what these things are, okay? Then I'm supposed to be able to identify whether I have any phrases. So this is actually, is it G-E-R-U-N-D?
Yeah.
I often misspell that word. A gerund phrase, okay? And then after all of this, I am supposed to identify that this entire thing is an independent clause. Okay? And so I started doing this with kids. Now, I will still sometimes use this method with kids, but I want to tell you that I ended up switching everything up because from the very beginning, I have to ask the kids some questions. I have to say, well, what is this sentence about? And what is it saying about, that's what we call a subject. And what is it saying about the subject? So right away, the first thing I always had to do was go to step 2. I always had to talk about what is the function of what these words are doing in a sentence. And often, in order to find that, I had to identify, was this a complete thought? Or was this an incomplete thought? And that determined the clause. And then to get some of the other stuff out of the way and figure out what's referring to what, I had to actually start bracketing off some phrases. And then it turns out the thing that was the least important is the thing everybody does first, which is parts of speech. In fact, I picked this sentence because we have 2 words here that look like they could be verbs because they have ing suffixes. Those 2 words both look like verbs and neither one are acting as verbs. So for a struggling learner, the first thing they're going to think is, that's a verb. but it's not functioning that way. And also, we may not recognize that this word is a verb unless we know a little more about it and what it's doing. So I ended up changing everything up with my students, and I changed the order. And the order became, first, we figure out the parts of the sentence. And we needed to know what were the basic structures that I had going on, including, do I need to bracket off some of my phrases? And I definitely needed to know pretty quickly whether this is an independent or dependent clause. And then some of this can be taught in various order, like sometimes prepositional phrases come in a little bit. The very last thing is parts of speech. And we only teach parts of speech as it's needed to support these other big ideas.
Yeah, I wouldn't say last, but it's sort of supplemental as you go, right?
Yes, it's all about function. Everything is about function. When you need it functionally, that's when we teach it. And so that's the way this whole class is going to be organized. So a lot of times throughout the class, it's not unusual that people will say, yeah, but is that an adverb? Because we are so driven toward parts of speech, we really want to know what everything's called. And what we want you to do is kind of take a minute and I just read Linda said, honestly, phrases scare me. They scare me too, Linda. But what we want you to do is kind of stop and rethink everything and constantly be asking yourself, what is that doing in this sentence? Not just what is it called, okay? And think about what it's called last.
I want to posit too that really good grammarians, or even just functional users of grammar, as we're all trying to be, cannot label parts of speech until you know how the words are functioning in a sentence. I actually cannot make a statement like understanding, that word, the word understanding is a verb. I can't say something like that because, as you just saw, it can be part of a noun phrase. It can be it can be a gerund. It could be meaning it's a noun. It could be a verb. It could be the direct object of a sentence. Like, it could be different parts of speech. I was sort of going in and out of parts of speech and parts of a sentence there. But depending on how it's functioning in a sentence, I mean, I don't know what a word is unless it's in a sentence and it's being used and it has a job. So to be able to rattle off like this word is this word is that, that really actually it's incorrect. We can't do that unless we know function.
Well, and someone just telling me that's an adverb, until I understand the function of an adverb, what does that word mean to me?
Yeah, it doesn't have
so you know, there's a lot of theory about do labels help us understand language, or does, you know, context help us understand labels, right? And I think both can be true. I mean, it does help to have a bucket to put a concept in. That's what a label does. It's somewhere to house that concept. But a label means nothing till you have experience with it, right? You know, think of the word faith. What does faith mean? You know, it means something different to everyone based on their experiences and their opinions and so many things. That's just a label. And that label can trigger all kinds of responses in different people, because what that bucket holds is what really matters. So I just want you thinking in that way as we proceed. And the more you get with that, the more you'll enjoy teaching grammar, right? And also, you don't have to know the answer to everything, what everything's called. That's the other beauty. The other thing I just want to say quickly is people often wonder, like, when should we really be starting this? Or is it really appropriate that public schools are asking kindergarten students to know subject, verb, adjective, and adverb? Well, I just want you to know that in the verbal language system, most 5-year-olds have the primary ingredients of all of these grammar structures we're talking about. Now, when we get to some of the more advanced phrases and some of the different, what we call subordinating conjunctions, those can be later developing. Or conjunctive adverbs, we're going to talk about that. That can be later developing. But certainly the first you know, 2/3 of this class is all information that the, you know, average 5-year-old has in their verbal language system. Now, a struggling language learner is not going to be as proficient, but that's okay, because when we can teach some things on the page, we're giving more context to it, we're holding it still, we're giving them time to process, and this could be a way they can learn it too, okay? So we're ready to start after all that.
All right, flipping to page 6.
So this is how we teach.
This is how we teach. This is level 1. So the first thing we're going to be learning is what we call the basic sentence mechanics. And when I say the first thing we are learning, sorry, I'm shifting my binder here. First thing we are learning, I mean the first thing you're learning and the first thing you'll be teaching to your students. So the basic sentence mechanics include things, when we use words like mechanics, actually, I guess the first 2 things we learn, if you look at where it says teach colon and then underneath that teach again, we kind of teach these things together. When we use a term like mechanics in grammar, you may have noticed that term in the title of this class. We're referring to kind of the punctuation and capitalization type rules that are applied so that sentences are organized and built in a way that is, you know, easy to understand by readers and writers, okay? So that's kind of what we mean when we talk about the mechanics. So we'll be teaching some basic sentence mechanics at the start. This is level 1. This is the kind of thing we teach students right away. This is the kind of thing I'd be teaching early readers. It's also the kind of thing I'd be reviewing with older students if we're learning grammar and we're kind of, you know, I want to make sure I'm building from the ground up. If you have older students, you might breeze through some of this stuff, but I would recommend not really skipping any parts of this grammar curriculum. So you might be thinking, oh, my student knows that. We go back through a lot of things to figure out where are the areas our students know really well and where are the areas where maybe I thought they should have known this and they don't. So that's easiest to find those holes if you kind of start from the beginning and move through. You can move through things quickly if kids already have certain stuff in place. So we'll be teaching those basic sentence mechanics, and we'll be teaching what we call the parts of a sentence. So if you see on there, it says that the parts of a sentence, and you know what I just realized? I just realized that I only have, I guess I could use small ones. I only have one color of Post-it right now because I didn't manage to go to the post or the store. Oh, here we go. I'll use these small ones. So I'll have to zoom in my camera here. One of the things I like to do when I demonstrate parts of a sentence is I like to use Post-it notes. You'll see I'm woefully shy on my Post-it notes. They're very skinny. I don't have much left on my stacks here. The reason I like Post-it notes is because it helps, it's sort of this easy visual of parts, right? I have this chunk and I have this chunk, and we're going to be giving some sentence terminology, some labels here, and kids can kind of see that, you know, these 2 chunks are part of every sentence. So I'm going to switch to my document camera. And I'm going to have you guys kind of tell me. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to try to move off my shadow. I always get a bit of a shadow when I'm under the light here. So I tell kids, we have 2 parts that every sentence must have. You don't have a sentence unless you have these 2 parts. In order to make a complete sentence or a complete thought, you need what is called a subject. And I'm going to put that on my pink Post-it here. And sometimes I'll write out the whole word, but just for ease here, I always abbreviate the word subject. If I'm going to abbreviate, I abbreviate it like SUBJ. Every sentence needs a subject, and it also needs a verb. And then we kind of label. I have to be very careful here because I just used a permanent marker on those, but I cannot do that on my little Rocketbook space here. And then I kind of define for them what that means. What is the function? What's the job of a subject? And what is the job of a verb? You'll hear us using words like job and function all the time because we really believe grammar needs to be built from this idea of how are these things functioning? What are they doing in a sentence? So what is a subject doing in a sentence? A subject tells me who or what the sentence is about. Sometimes people refer to the subject as like the topic. That word can be helpful. It isn't always helpful. If I'm like, find the topic, that's not always easy to do. Really, we want to be looking for the word that is the who or what that's kind of driving that sentence, what this sentence is about. The verb is always going to be giving us the information of what the subject is doing. And I say to kids, we don't really have a thought if we just mention a who or a what. If I don't say anything about what that who or what did, I haven't created any kind of thought. And sometimes with early writing or young kids, that when they're first learning to write and they're starting to create what they believe are sentences, they might write some things like the big hairy dog, period. And the problem with that statement is, while it has many words in it, it doesn't make a sentence, because a sentence always has to have a subject and a verb. It has to tell me what the big hairy dog did. I need some sort of, sometimes we'll refer to this as an action. Some of you may already know that that word action isn't always helpful in finding the verb, but generally verbs are actions. So we might begin to practice creating some sentences to help demonstrate this idea that we always need a who or a what, and we always need some word telling us what the who or what is doing. Okay, and in fact, I do want to say, we really believe in having kids engage in marking up sentences that they're reading or that you've written for them, like doing marking on reading, but also engaging in creating these structures themselves in original writing as they learn. So I'm going to just grab a different color. You can practice building some simple sentences that all have a subject and a verb. I'm getting a shadow. I'm trying to figure out where it's coming from. I don't know what it's coming from.
Where I was organizing some things for what I was going to show for you, I missed this. Did you talk about how we have kids actually write out the word subject? Had you said that yet?
I said I abbreviated because my Post-it was small, but do you mean like why I didn't write it out here? Or do you mean
often I have kids write out the whole word subject and verb for a while. They always have to write the whole word, not abbreviate it, because I'm trying to get them to get that word into their vocabulary. We say it while we write, we syllable chunk, and we help them really repeatedly write the word subject so they begin to get it into their vocabulary.
Because these are new vocabulary terms for kids. And just so you know, this kind of thing that I'm writing down here is part of what we might be doing together to create a language arts binder page. And depending on the writing skills of the student, I might write the word subject and then have them write the word subject. You know, I might like write it first and then they copy it if they can't spell it. Or if they can spell it, then they're the ones who write it. So keep that in mind. I might give them a Post-it where I've written it, but then they get to copy it and say subject as they're writing in their language arts binder or something like that. Okay. And yes, the more we can have kids verbalizing these terms, saying them as they write, you know, using them as much as we can in conversation in which they have to say them too, will help kids who struggle with word retrieval and building those memories of words. That will help these things kind of become a little bit more solid. So something I would do at this point, actually what I'm going to show you is I'd probably give students an example. And on your page 6, you'll see kind of halfway down the page, we have a little example from an early reader that's part of our Pinwheels program. And it's an early reader sentence. And we've chosen an early reader sentence because this is the kind of thing I'm generally teaching a young child. But if I was reviewing subject and verb or teaching this to an older child, I'd just use a more grade level appropriate sentence. But if it is a complete sentence, it should have a subject and verb. So I'm going to use an early reader one, and we have the sentence on here. Oh, dang. Is that way too light? It's a little too light. I always discover this about my purple, and I always think my purple will be dark enough, and it isn't. Tell me if you can see the blue.
It's not great.
Not great. Well, dang. Maybe I have to write in black the whole time. Let's try red, and then I'll be done drawing.
I find my purple, my
Ah,
blue,
the
my
red's not
black,
bad.
and the red are all good. Yeah.
Okay. So we have a sentence, Pam Pats. You'll notice we sort of left out the article here because in some of these early readers, you know, a lot of those article words are not really controlled. They make sounds we don't expect. They sort of break some of the initial rules that kids learn about letters and sounds. So there is no article in this sentence, but it is a complete sentence because it has our two basic sentence structure components. Who or what is this sentence about? It is about Pam. What is our subject, or what is Pam doing? Pats. There's her action. She pats the bag. Now you'll notice that I have this little marking system I just showed you. And if you look underneath where we wrote Pam pats bag on your instructional plan, it says that we underline the subject and we kind of zigzag or squiggle underneath the verb, which we kind of like because it sort of shows that this is the anchoring that topic of who or what is driving the sentence. And this is kind of feels movement-y, kind of action-y, as verbs generally are. And sometimes I'll again have kids write out these labels and say the words as they are labeling them, and I might let them abbreviate if they're doing it above words in a sentence, but they have to say subject, verb, as they do these labels on top. I don't always have them do the labels over time. We just do kind of the marking system, but at the beginning we do a lot of labeling to help them remember terms. And then we would engage in, move this down a little bit more, we would engage in some of our own sentence writing, our own original writing of this structure so that kids can practice the sort of expressive language component, the engaging in having to do this themselves in their writing. We have a lot of people tell us, I taught all this grammar, they learned all the parts of speech, and yet their writing is still a mess. Well, the reality is, if you're not practicing these structures in writing as you go, it's not really going to naturally make it into most children's writing. We actually have to kind of practice that. We have to actually practice not just learning what these things are called and maybe how to identify them, but also how to create them ourselves, because we are, in fact, building a structure here. Grammar in language, in written language especially, is a structure. And what are structures if not things that need to be built and certainly practiced built? So that's what we're going to do. So I might say, okay, let's write a sentence about, you know, I always pick the child's name, but I'm going to pick my own name here for now because I don't have a kid with me. I'm going to write a sentence about you. Let's say that if my sentence is about you, then you would be my subject because you are the topic. So we can start with Maura, and I always do this sentence because it's what I am always doing. Eats. I'm always eating. And let me practice marking these two important components of my sentence. What is the subject? Who or what my sentence is about? Maura. What is the verb? What's Maura doing? Eats. And I get to squiggle that verb there. I might have you guys on your page, I'm going to switch back to my face here, each write a sentence or two that you think has a subject and a verb. Think about a topic, think about a subject. What could be the subject of your sentence? It is a subject as long as it's a who or a what that could do something. And it is a sentence if you include what the who or what does. So you have to include that verb. So go ahead and on your own paper, and this is something I'd have kids do, either on the language arts paper or binder page that we're creating. We may write some examples on there. I always do examples and have kids help come up with the examples. And then we might even do some more practice in a composition notebook of practicing writing sentences that have a subject and a verb. These are simple sentences. I wanted you to notice that in the sentence, Pam pats bag, I could show it again, but in that sentence, you have it on your page. There's another word in that sentence. A sentence doesn't only need to have a subject and a verb, and I point that out to kids. There was another word. What is that word doing? Well, we don't really know yet, because all we've learned how to look for or what to look for is the subject and the verb. We do know sentences can be longer. I can make really long sentences. So there's obviously a lot more words that can show up in a sentence, but what every sentence must have at a minimum is that subject and that verb. And so I might let them write longer sentences. What's your subject? Maura, what's your verb? Eats. All right, do you want to make it longer or do you want to end it there? Can I say Maura eats a big fat sandwich? Sure, we can write that down. And then let's mark our subject and verb. Now you have some interfering information there, and you have to still be able to find that subject and verb. You don't have to label anything else yet because we're practicing looking for just those kernel elements of a sentence. And you'll see this become trickier or sort of higher level as it might be if you're looking at, say, 9th grade level text in a minute. So go ahead and jot a few sentences down on your sheet. You don't have to share them. You can, if you want, type them in the chat, what your sentences you created were and what you marked as your subject and your verb.
Noelani made an interesting point about her son does well with parts of speech, but she likes the functional approach anyway. It's not really bogging him down necessarily, but she still likes the functional approach. And one of the things I find when I see kids who are really good at parts of speech is I sometimes almost have to reteach them, though, to think about the content of the sentence first before they start analyzing the parts of speech, which is what I like about this is it takes you right to content right away. It is about Pam, and Pam is doing something, she pats. And that actually is of primary importance before we identify, you know, the part of speech of what's happening here. So
I forgot actually before I switched off my camera to show you how we might mark something like this on a manipulative. And you will see that we use a lot of manipulatives. These bugs are our main manipulative, and also we'll use Post-it notes. We try to use manipulatives as much as we can when teaching grammar because it is a structure that has a lot of parts that get built on top of one another, and it is tricky. Yeah?
Just so you know, we're not doing direct object yet.
I wasn't going to.
Oh, you have, oh, you're doing the bottom. I wasn't realizing what you were going to put there.
So remember I said at the top that we teach these basic components of a sentence. I'll kind of scoot back down here, but we also teach early mechanics. So at the top, we would also be teaching kids to be looking out for, to be starting to engage in and notice, so write themselves, but also notice in reading, that we have these mechanical rules that go with a sentence that has to have a subject and a verb. In addition, the mechanics of every sentence would include a capital letter to start your sentence and a piece of punctuation that marks the ending of your sentence. And we teach period first. And so early on in the bugs, what we use the bugs to do is kind of show the most distilled elements of sentences that can grow and get quite complex. But what are these sentence pieces that we still have to be able to track in order to comprehend and to create, you know, cohesive, easy to understand sentences ourselves in our own writing? So on my bug, at this point, I always would mark, or actually always, not just at this point, but at this point, this is what I would have them do. But we always mark our subject on the head, because the subject is like the head of the sentence. It's what drives everything else. We always mark our verb on the body because it sort of is that piece that has the legs that move, so it kind of gives you that image of verbs being that movement type of word. And for right now, just so that we can have a complete bug picture, you can either just create a bug that has the subject verb at this point, but if you have a student like my students who are like, but the bug doesn't have an end, what? Then we would just put our little period on the end to show that very necessary mechanic. And I would have them maybe capitalize this word if it was the first word of the sentence and or a name. Okay, so, okay, oh. You know, I have 8 different kinds of markers I need to use for all of them. This was my Rocketbook marker. This is my laminated vis-a-vis Pats. That's all that needs to go on my bug because that's my subject and verb. Those are my sentence parts at this point that I've learned. And if we want to make a complete bug, I can put the period over there. Okay, so that's the kernel. That shows like I have a longer sentence, but the piece I need to know, the pieces I need to know is that head of the sentence and what the topic of the sentence is doing, and I have shown that on my bugs, okay? These bugs are going to get a lot more illustrative as we go of how distilling those kernel elements from a sentence that is a lot more complex can really help with comprehension. You'll see that as we get into more complex sentences. All right, if you turn your page to page 7, we have a bunch of practice sentences for you. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do, I could have a couple of these on my.
Maura, before they do that, do you want me to show them where this
Oh,
is?
yes. Show them the Grammar Bugs page. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Wait, I got to take it off you.
I know I am going to write with one of the wrong markers on my Rocketbook and ruin it forever. Ugh. I get scared of that every year.
So this is Big Bug Grammar 1. We are talking about ooh, is that hard to read?
No.
Okay. Sentence types. Just to give you a close-up picture, this is a picture of what the octopus looks like that would be in the corner of our Big Bug pages. We did not put octopuses in this in your instructional plan that you have in front of you, because really everything in this instructional plan is for you, the learner, and you would be building pages with your students for their LA binder, as Maura is showing you in a hands-on way. But an example, and it has the octopus in the corner of from Big Bugs 1, page 7, is we have a page here that is the subject and the verb. And if you have children who have dysgraphia and their writing is very illegible, you can have them build a page. You also can have them cut out some of the pictures on this, and using some double back tape, get it on so they have this kind of nice, clean version. Sometimes what I do with kids is we will build a grammar page, as Maura showed you, and then maybe the next year we'll review those pages, and then we'll put in some of these clean copies from the Bug program that would go in. But this is really showing subject, who or what the sentence is about, verb, what the subject is doing. We have an example here, bugs run on the bugs, just as Maura was showing you. Okay. You ready, Mom?
Yes, I just dropped a marker in my lap. All right, so I'm going to show you, if you guys turn to page 7, we have a bunch of practice sentences for you here to help solidify this idea of every sentence needs these two important parts, subject and verb, and also to practice our little marking system. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I wrote a couple of the sentences. There's several sentences on that page. I wrote down the first one and the third one. You can just mark directly on your page. And what we're going to do is we're going to read the sentence. Kanika helps. And we are going to, I like to use a different color, mark the subject by underlining it and the verb by squiggling it. This kind of sentence is obviously very easy, or at least easier, because we're asking them to identify two kernel pieces and there are only 2 words in the sentence, so it's got to be those 2 words. Kanika is our who or what, and she is doing something helps. So that's our verb. You'll notice I'm skipping the second one. You can mark that yourself if you want. If you have questions, the answers are in the back, or you can ask. But I'm going down to this third one because it throws a curveball. So I had noticed that someone had asked Claire a question about the grammar, the bug head. Here's my bug head that had Pam on it. She had said, do we always put the subject on the head even if the subject isn't the first thing in the sentence? And the answer is yes. The subject is always the thing that is driving your sentence because it is acting on the verb, even if it doesn't come first. And kids can start to kind of get a little bit stuck in, if we do too many sentences just like this, kids will get stuck in this idea of, like, you know, these parts being positional. Like, oh, well, I always know where the subject is because it's always first. Well, of course not, because grammar is never easy, right? Our language system gets quite complex, as you will see with this third sentence on your list. So this sentence says, surprising her brother, Jasmine threw hard. Well, who or what is this sentence about? Despite the fact that the who or what doesn't appear until the 4th word in the sentence, this sentence is still actually about Jasmine because she is the only who or what that has an accompanying action, through. So our subject is Jasmine and our verb is through. Boy, that's confusing because we might have a lot of students who kind of jump to the first word in the sentence. Or if you have slightly more syntax savvy kids, they might jump to the first noun. Because you may have noticed I haven't been using the word noun, but a who or a what is just another way of saying a noun. Because nouns are people, they are places, they are things. That is who or what. So a student who maybe kind of gets that idea that a topic kind of has to be a thing or a noun might say that this sentence is about brother, if you ask them what the subject is, because they kind of jump to that first noun. It is in fact not about the brother, because the brother doesn't do anything. There is no verb with brother, and you only have a subject if you also have a verb with that subject, or that the subject is doing. Okay? I'm going to pull down so that you can see how we would apply. Like I said, we always start with subject and verb, no matter the age of the student. You just maybe are using some higher level types of sentences to identify subject and verb, which does make it trickier because there's other stuff that is in there that is kind of interfering. So I'm going to show you the sentence. Go ahead and keep marking those practice ones if you want. And let me know if you have questions. Oops, I got to back up a little bit. And yes, every time I laminate something, I get a little bit of a glare. I'll try to make it so that that glare is not over a word when I can. I apologize for that. So this is a sentence, you'll notice it's in quotes. If you look at the bottom of page 7, we have it down there. From the very grammatically complex piece of literature, Animal Farm. And if you've ever read Animal Farm, you know this is not an easy book to read. It wouldn't be considered an early reader by any stretch of the imagination. And typically this is a book that kids read sometimes in high school, somewhere around high school. So it's high school level text. And this is a quote from that book. We just pulled out a sentence, and it says, amazed, terrified, huddling together, the animals watched the long line of pigs march slowly round the yard. Now I'm going to let you guys see if you can figure out the subject and the verb. That's all you have to mark, even though this is a long sentence, the subject and the verb of this sentence. I'm going to give you a couple minutes. Or seconds, really. And if you're kind of marking on your paper, I'm going to ask you guys to give some answers in the chat. What do you think is the subject here? Just the subject. Very good. And what is the verb? Nice. Consensus, I love it. Okay, it means you guys are tracking. Awesome. Why might finding the subject and verb in this sentence be confusing? Well, first of all, we have all kinds of nouns. We have animals, we have pigs, we have yard. Okay? We also have all kinds of words that in other sentences could easily be verbs. Amazed, terrified, huddling. Okay? March. Okay? A lot of times kids will point out adverbs they think they're verbs slowly, because that feels like an action, sort of, somehow, right? Okay? So we've got all kinds of things that can be pulling us from actually comprehending the sentence. And long, complex sentences get very difficult for students to comprehend, especially if there's comprehension issues. So being able to zoop to the subject and verb is oh so important for reading comprehension, and also important for being able to write complex sentences and not get lost in your own complexity and end up with sentences that have a lot in them but don't actually say anything. So I could also use bugs here. We have this giant sentence, and I'm going to see if you can just distill the subject and the verb, which would be animals watched. That's really mostly the information we need to be able to track from this sentence. There's more that is important, which we'll get to, but this is the kernel. All right.
Maura, so could you address why it isn't pigs marched? Can you put the sentence back up and address that? And I have to say, another thing that could be confusing for a lot of our students is all of those describer words that we have in the beginning, the amazed, terrified, huddling together. A lot of kids would also recognize as verby looking words. And
Yeah, I did say that. That
okay,
these
so
words look like verbs.
sorry, Maura. Okay.
Yes. Okay. So did someone ask the question about, why isn't it
Pigs March?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, this question will really be answered in what we're about to teach coming up. But if you notice, we do have a noun followed by a verb. I don't know how to answer this question without sort of getting into later material.
Well, you can just generally say it. We'll teach more on it later.
We will be teaching this, but the subject is the topic of the sentence. The verb is what that subject is doing. You often have other things that follow that verb that can include other nouns and other verbs, but because of this little word right here, the word of, that puts this inside what we call a prepositional phrase, and therefore cannot be the subject. Subjects are always direct. They are the thing that is driving the rest of the sentence. We have long line, which is another thing. Actually, line is a noun here, which is what the animals watched. We call that a direct object.
Which we're about to teach on in the next level.
And then we have of pigs, which is actually just explaining more about what they watched.
The line.
Watching a long line.
Right.
Of pigs, which is sort of describing the line, what line, right? A line of pigs. And then march slowly around the yard is not the verb that goes with my subject, therefore cannot be the main verb of the sentence. It does still feel like a verb, but it is not the verb because it's kind of giving me information about a prepositional phrase, which is in fact not the subject, all because of this preposition word. So it's tricky because we do see a noun followed by a verb-looking word. I want you to know, though, that while other verb-like words may appear in a sentence, they may not be actually acting like verbs, depending on kind of how they're functioning. And here, this is in fact not really the verb of this sentence, even though it feels like one. And it is conveying verb information, but it isn't acting like a verb. I do say that to kids a lot.
Yeah, it kind of has this. Yeah, okay. The biggest reason why we give you a sentence like this is because what we really believe in is helping kids explicitly see what's going on. We're going to talk about why a bug is better than a diagram sentence in a minute. So remind me to get to that. But also, we all have this, right? Where we have these grammar programs and they have these neat little sentences. And then our kids write or read, and they are not neat little sentences. They're these big complex monsters. So we want you to actually be using, especially in your intentional copy work, the sentences that are in your copy work and applying some grammar to that. And you are going to get these kinds of monstrous sentences. And so a lot of what we do is we bracket off the information that we just kind of help kids right from the very front. So Maura didn't do it that time, but she could have. She could have just said, okay, I'm going to put some brackets around some things that are called phrases, and we're going to learn more about that later. But once I bracket off these phrases, see now if you can find the subject and verb of the sentence. And it's
I do have a note to do that later, but I didn't put a note on.
Yeah, we didn't do it. And
I also actually wanted you to see that it can be hard to find the subject and verb in a big Mondo sentence like that too.
Yeah, right. And it also, if you have older kids and you're thinking, yeah, well, I don't need to start at level 1, my answer would be, yes, you do. You just need to up your sentences, probably. Yeah. Because we find, we will sit here and debate over sentences. You know, the adults are doing it. It happens all the time. So the more complex the sentence, you still could just be working on subject and verb in complex sentences. And certainly when kids are editing their own writing, the first thing they need to find is their subject and verb. And they might have written a rather monstrous sentence like that.
That's what I was going to say, is that it's also very important for kids' own writing just because, like we said, these are kids who've been speaking English for quite a lot longer than they've been learning to read and write in English, and therefore they sometimes can write these sentences that are like have all kinds of things in them, and you're like, whoa, I know this sentence needs something, but how do I help them see that? So understanding these pieces is very important for editing with kids.
And we want you to feel the challenge yourself, quite honestly. You know, we knew that sentence was going to be at a level that challenges us as adults. And, you know, that's why we're here. We're learning too. The more we can understand it, the better. Okay, so Maura gave you a little heads up into where we're going. We're moving on to page 8. As you would imagine from my early little demo of what really matters most, that a lot of what we're going to be going over in this part 1 are some of these foundational pieces that we need to get in place. And like most of our classes, those foundational pieces moves more slowly, okay? So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, we're only on page 8, don't worry. And also that's why this is a 3-part class. Okay, so.
And also, yes, we're only on page 8. Oh my gosh.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a little time out here in the beginning here. Now that we've taught kids kind of what subjects and verbs are doing, we take time out to create a binder page on what are those appropriate parts of speech that they need to learn. And what I like to do is I kind of like to coordinate my colors a little bit here. So I'm just laying out my plan, even though I'm not going to fill all this out, okay? And so I'm revisiting with kids this idea that we have 2 main parts of a sentence. We have a subject and we have a verb. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and write the word verb, or have the student write that. And I'm going to tell kids at this point that all subjects are this certain kind of word we call a noun. Now remember, all subjects are nouns, but not all nouns are subjects, okay? So we have nouns, and a noun is a person, and we draw our little things here, a place, a thing, which usually I draw a table and everyone thinks it looks like a bug, okay? And then also an idea, and we do a little light bulb for our idea or a concept, okay? All right, so a noun, and we might do this bigger. I'm doing it kind of small here because we're going to build on this paper over time. But if this was a young student, and we would possibly go back to a page more like Maura had made for subject verb and done it on a big Post-it note, and we might have this person, we would have these person, place, thing, or idea. We might have those be little pictures that we draw around the word noun, okay? And at this point, I teach kids that a noun can be replaced by these certain words, okay? And this is where I would teach them that the words such as I, he, she, it, these are not new words to our kids. They're in their verbal language system, that we call those pronouns. And these are our words that we use. This is actually a light blue color. It looks white on your board. That these pronouns would replace a noun. They're little functional words we use to replace a noun. So if I'm talking about Rita, I can say I. If I'm talking about Maura, I would say she. And we go through this, you know, what are some of the words that you know that could replace? And I go from the conversation of their verbal language system, and we could make a little chart of pronouns if you want, okay? And this is also the stage where I would teach them that nouns are often categorized as 2 types. And I would spend more time on this for a younger child, but this is the kind of work I feel like most of you are pretty comfortable with.
Just so everyone knows, Rita is using the handout I sent before the class, that second handout I sent, and she's also kind of teaching on the
No, it's not on the handout. No, we decided just let him build this one. No. Yeah, this isn't the one that's all the parts of speech.
Oh, sorry, I thought that was that handout.
No.
Oh, it looks like it.
This is the one I was kind of debating about sending.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. This is similar to the handout you have, but not exactly it.
Yes.
And he reiterates about the
But what I wanted to say is people were asking, are you on level 1 or level 2? And she is at the top of level 2, I believe.
Top of level 2, page 8. Yes. So I'm building a little chart here, the kind of thing I might put in their LA binder. Okay.
Oh, it looks just like my handout.
And at this point, I would begin to work with kids on this difference between proper and common nouns. I might say, you know, and we would begin to sort them. Okay. This is not the one that's just the parts of speech. We're just separating out some things we know about verbs. Okay. And nouns. And also, the other thing we might talk about here is that so far we've talked about one kind of verb. And that one kind of verb is an action verb. And that's just some important information that I would take time out to be working with kids, that proper nouns have a capital. I always capitalize proper. I guess I did common too, but we talk about that, how these proper nouns are always capitalized. We talk about how this verb was an action verb and that we did those zigzaggy lines, okay? So this is, if you're working on sorting out what are your different pieces of information that you want to be teaching kids, this is where I take time out to do it, okay? The sheet that Maura was referring to.
Sorry.
Nope, it's okay.
It's similar at the top, so I got confused for a second.
This is another place for kids who have a little more under their belt and they already know some of this. We can begin to house this information by building a chart, our own chart, which you have, that now has this noun, person, place, thing, idea, the pronoun that's connected with it, and that these two important parts of speech that we always find in a sentence is a noun and a verb. Okay? So one side of your handout has the completed chart, which again, if you have kids who have dysgraphia and their writing is hard for them to read, you can use those. You can help write it for them. You can have them copy one and then replace it later with the cleaner version. But what we like to do is have kids begin to build this as they go.
You can see on mine, if you want to, that I draw a little like alien spaceship thing for the word
My
thing.
table with a little alien.
Someone was asking, yeah, it kind of looks like your table, but just with a little alien guy. Someone was asking what you drew for thing, and you could draw whatever you want. It's hard to come up with a thing.
It is hard to come up with a thing. Okay. So Maura was talking to you about this subject. I'm going to kind of do this in two levels of analysis. Okay, so far we've talked about the subject and a type of verb we call an action verb. Okay, and we had two questions. The first question is, who or what is the sentence about? The second question was, what is the subject doing? And the third question is, doing with what or whom? Doing what or doing whom? How do we say that? Doing whom? I never know how to say that, Tracy.
I would just say doing what.
Or it's what or who is really the questions. The questions are what. I talked myself into a little corner there, didn't I? Or who. Okay. So I could say, Rita meets Tracy that answered the question. I have subject, it's about Rita, is doing what, meets, who, Tracy. Does that make sense? Or I could say, okay,
You should way further up. Yeah,
how am I doing?
more.
Let me get my pens out of the way.
You can bring
There you go.
thing like
Out.
No. Leave the top alone. Just scoot the entire thing closer. Oh, you're good right there.
Yeah, except now I got a glare. Do you see that? I have a terrible glare. Can you help me with that glare?
I'm not sure what it's glaring.
I think,
You don't have the light on there on.
no. Do I? I think our light might be out. No, wait, sorry.
It doesn't matter. You can keep going because we can't, the glare is only on the top one.
Yeah, I'm about to fill that in though, so I didn't actually want that. Okay. So I also could say, Rita loves peanut butter. Okay? Rita loves what? Peanut butter. The thing that the verb acts on is called a direct object. And what we're learning here is our first complete sentence type. Subject plus action verb plus direct object. And what I want you to appreciate is that when we talk about these sentence kernels, these kind of sentence types, that when we use a manipulative like the bug, what we really learned from this when we were doing it ourselves and started using bugs for this purpose is it really helped kids get the information more solidly in their heads. Like when you diagram a sentence, first of all, to diagram a sentence, you have to have a lot of knowledge already. You can kind of problem solve a little bit with bugs in a way that you can't problem solve with diagramming sentences. For one thing, if you make a mistake on a bug, you just replace the part or you erase. Diagramming a sentence, you kind of end up kind of having to start over again, or you can end up having to start over again. Also, the relationship between what it's doing is more clear. Lines heading off in different directions can be difficult, but when you really are holding pieces in these chunks like this, it's easier for kids to understand. Okay? Also, I could potentially write a few words together instead of having to have everything branching. Every word is a different branch on a line. If you can picture what diagramming sentences looks like, I can hold words together on the bugs based on what they're doing, what they really are. Does that make sense? So we have this sentence type, subject plus action verb plus direct object. This is the most common and commonly understood sentence type. It's the one that children who have language delays are the most comfortable with. It is what early writers will rely on. Some of you may have said, hey, I want you to write about your dog. And your child writes, I like my dog. My dog plays. My dog eats dog food. Dogs like toys, right? You get a lot of this subject, action verb, object. And you'll get some prepositional phrases in there too, because kids tend to understand that as well. We're not doing that right now. But I just want you to know that this is kind of this isn't hard for kids. This is the part that gets to be a little easier for them. More, you want to say something?
I was just, what you had said before about how the bugs let you group words on a single piece. Some of you might be thinking, why would I want to group words? Why not parse them all out? And the reality is when we can group things, just like we do when we're reading, when you can suddenly start to group sounds in a syllable, when you can start to group things in chunks, it makes comprehension of complex things with a lot of parts a lot easier. If you can begin to kind of chunk things together based on all of them having, you know, this single function, that's going to make comprehension better for very complex sentences, and sentences will just get more and more and more complex. So it's important that, you know, you can chunk something like peanut butter together, because that's really a single concept, and our brain wants to keep it together because it is involved in the same function of being a direct object. So I just wanted to say that. That's why chunking is good, if you
So
can.
a direct object answers who or what the action is acting on. Okay, so in this case, Rita meets who? Tracy. Rita loves what? Peanut butter. So you can ask that question and help kids figure out what's going to go here in the bug bottom. Okay, now what I want to show you is that you have a sentence that is where it says mark the sentence. It says Pam helps the dog. Okay, so before we talk about marking this, I just want to use my bugs for a minute here. Okay, so we would write Pam helps what? Or who? Dogs could feel like a who, right? Dog. Now, some kids are really kind of bothered by just writing Pam helps dog. And they'll say, well, it's the dog. Okay, and they're right, it is. And for now, we may just write right here, the. See how that holds this together? They still know dog is the thing, the main word I'm going for, but they were able to hold that together. And actually, we may even talk about, well, what is the word the doing? Well, it's describing the dog. It's describing dog. That's what does the is doing. Duh. That's what the is doing. It's describing dog. And our arrows kind of tell us that. Because why? Because it's functional. The arrow says, hey, I'm talking about this.
So we didn't show that on page 8, but if you look at page 8 where it says Pam helps the dog, you can draw an arrow if you want.
Yeah, we just haven't added that piece yet. I got a little ahead of us there. Now, the other thing I want you to know is that sometimes these action verbs act on a direct object, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have to, and sometimes they don't have to. So if I say Rita meets, and it isn't acting on a direct object, that feels like I'm missing some information. Rita meets, what are you saying? What Rita meets who, right? You need that answer. This is called a transitive verb. If you think of the word trans, it's going across. The verb needs to create this connection, or is creating this connection between the subject, what the subject's doing, and who or what they're doing it with, okay? If I say Pam helps the dog, this is a transitive verb because it's acting on an object. It also could be an intransitive verb, what we call intransitive, in being the prefix that means not. It doesn't have to cross over to a direct object. So sometimes you will read sentences that have intransitive verbs. You know they're an action verb, and you're like, hey, well, how come that one doesn't have to have a direct object? Well, it doesn't because it's intransitive. Okay? So here it's acting as an intransitive verb. Here it's acting as a transitive verb. Now, do I tell kids all this? I actually do. We may do a word study on the word trans, but I don't make them remember necessarily that it's transitive or intransitive. I will kind of keep providing that information for them. Remember, this is the one that doesn't have to cross trans. It's intransitive. It doesn't have to have the direct object. So I'll just go ahead and keep providing that wording for them. Unless, of course, they have a test coming up in which they have to be able to answer the question of what's transitive and intransitive, and then we do a lot more work on that vocabulary. But it's important for you to know because you will come across it and you will find yourself teaching it. Okay?
Someone was asking a question. You had given sort of verbally the example, my dog eats dog food. And she was asking about the word my and where that would go. And I said it's similar to the word the, etc. And so kind of, it's not technically part of the subject in that sentence, my dog eats dog food, but it sort of feels like it goes with the subject. So you can kind of write those little articles or possessive pronouns on the outside of the actual pieces so that kids know what the word is, what the kernel word is they're looking for, but they're also aware that that is kind of part of the chunk of comprehending that piece of information. Often includes these articles and possessive pronouns. And sometimes when we are, if she's bringing out a racket book, when we are writing sentences or when the sentences are written and not on bugs, I may let kids include the article or a possessive pronoun in the underline of the subject. So if it was my dog eats dog food, I may let them underline my dog as the subject. Some kids, will want to be more technical and stringent about, no, dog is only the subject. But from a comprehension standpoint, and we all are about being functional, technically, yes, dog is the subject. From a functional standpoint, my dog will do just fine. Because comprehension-wise, that is the subject material you are understanding.
So some grammar programs will refer to dog as the simple subject.
Oh, thank you for that.
Tracy was like dying here wanting me to say that. And this would be, they might call this the subject, this the, or a complete subject. And this would be the simple subject.
Love
Again,
it.
you can talk about that, use that terminology as needed. You could just have kids go ahead, this is the subject is my dog, and then over time teach them, well, there is this word that's really the simple subject, that's the one I really need you to hone in on. I have a tendency mostly to just go right for dog and to teach them that my is describing the dog. I don't even need to teach them that's called an adjective yet, or a possessive, or any of those things. Or possessive pronoun, I guess, that's acting as an adjective. It's both. Okay, so there you go. There's a parts of speech thing, right? My, what are you going to call that? Are you going to call that a pronoun? Or are you going to call that an adjective? It's both. And by the way, it's a possessive pronoun. So which word are you going to pick? Or are you going to have to list them both all the time? But what you really know is what it's doing. It's describing dog. Okay? So we have dog eats. Now, one of the reasons, just to be clear, when I work with older students, I tend to hone right in on the simple subject, because when you get to those really complicated sentences that have a lot of describing words, they can get really lost in it. It's really good for them to hone in on the subject. If I have a younger child who's really thinking of my dog as a subject, my dog is different than your dog, right? My dog is it's its own thing. Then I'm more likely to not worry about that being the subject. So that's one of the times that I make that distinction. Okay. By the way, this verb could be intransitive, but in this word, it is transitive. My dog eats what? He eats dog food. So we have dog eats, and then we mark our direct object with this little bracket, and we may put a DO above or below it. You can write it above, you can write it below for direct object. Now, again, when kids are first learning these words, I might actually have them write direct object.
Mom, can you?
Or they may have to write it on their bugs first before we start talking about it. We'll set up the sentence structure. So every time they have to write subject, action, verb, direct object here, then we can build bugs and do sentences here. And I've had them practice that vocabulary writing it here. I'm sorry?
There was a lot of confusion on your sentence, Tracy meets, or Rita meets Tracy, whether or not you were saying that was transitive or intransitive, or that Tracy was the direct object or whatever. Can you restate very clearly for everyone what a transitive verb is and what an intransitive verb is and what those have to do with the direct object?
Okay. Let me go to another page. I'm I'm glad you're asking these questions too, because it's important to get this straight in your head. Okay. So let's go back to Pam helps the dog. I'm gonna start here, okay? So we're talking about whether a verb is trans, crosses, transitive, crosses to, trans meaning cross, across, to the direct object, okay? So if a verb has a direct object, Pam helps the dog. Wait, am I saying this wrong, Tracy?
No, you're saying it exactly right.
Okay. If it takes a direct object, it is called transitive. Should have not. Okay. Transitive. All of a sudden, it really looked funny to me.
You guys may notice sometimes we start to doubt ourselves when you're teaching and talking in front of people. You never, sometimes words come out of your mouth and you're like, what did I just say?
Well, and it is funny because like Tracy's such a grammarian that she's sitting here kind of like making these faces, and then I think, does that mean did something wrong? So I always like think,
Well, see,
I think I'm saying this right, aren't I? All right, so anyway.
It's easy to notice all the little things when you're just
Yeah, it really
listening.
is. Trust me. Okay, so this verb is transitive. It takes a direct object. Dog is the direct object. It answers the action what? Pam helps what? A dog. Okay? It's answering the question, action what? Helps what? Dog. Okay? This word, however, helps, could stand alone in a sentence. If we were talking about the dog, and I said, well, Pam helps, I have now made this verb intransitive. It no longer crosses. There's not taking a direct object. Okay? So
Go ahead, sorry.
when I had the sentence, Rita meets Tracy, it meets, ask the question who? Rita meets who? Tracy. It's the action verb who meets who? Tracy. Okay? She answers the question who. This verb crosses and takes a direct object. Tracy. She is the object. Person, place, or thing. Or idea, right? Object is a noun. That's something I haven't said yet. An object is a noun. Just as a subject is a noun. I'll get to that in a minute, okay? So, Rita meets Tracy. This verb happens to be the kind of verb that can never be intransitive. It has to be transitive because it doesn't make sense in a sentence if it doesn't have a direct object. Some verbs can be both.
That's what I was just typing.
Absolutely a direct object. Some don't.
I want to say too, you may choose not to get into the transitive, intransitive thing right away.
Absolutely.
I
But
do
you
that
also, but you also will come upon action verbs that you expect to have a direct object and they don't. And you may have kids who ask you why. And you might be glad you have this answer.
Good to know, but you don't have to dig into it immediately upon practicing subject, action, verb, direct object. I don't always, and I'll often circle back to it when it inevitably comes up.
Right. Well, we used to not always teach this in our grammar class. And then sometimes in the rooted community, you'll get a lot of questions about this. And, you know, the truth is you're here to learn. It does feel a little overwhelming. You don't have to teach all these pieces all the time. And we give you a videotape so you can go back and look at it again. So for me, because I am becoming more and more of a word study person, I like connecting. And also, by the way, I have a horrible memory for vocabulary. So I like connecting the word parts that help me understand how these words came about. So that's why I pointed out this base word of trans. If you've taken our word study class, you might recognize that as probably the base word, meaning across. And actually, I would say that if you turn this word into a word study lesson, transportation, so many things, the kids are going to care about it a lot more. It's not just another grammar word that you're throwing out there. I do the same thing, and I'm not going to do it here, but just so you know, with ject in subject means to throw under, like the subject who's under the king. Okay, that term of subject, the subject to the king, kind of under, thrown under the king, literally sometimes, became the word for this part of a sentence. And that J-E-C-T is the same word you see in the word object. They both are referring to nouns. And it's the same base word you see in adjective adding to the noun that describes a noun. And we do a word study on J-E-C-T, and we do it in grammar. And it really helps my kids remember those words and what they mean. And that's the beauty of word study. Okay. All right. So where am I? One more thing. I wanted you to see that this could be a time, we have our little squirrely lessons going on here, but this is how grammar works. You can't teach it all at once. You've got to teach a little at a time. And then you just keep revisiting it as you go. But this is an opportunity to use, I'm going to use our alien bugs for this, to do a little bit of study on the fact that you have these different verb suffixes that influence our tense, our verb tense. So if I say Rita helps, that's happening right now. This is not hard for kids. It's in their verbal language system. If I say, yeah, but what if Rita already did that? What would my sentence be then? They would say, oh, it's Rita helped. And then what if Rita's still doing it? That's when it becomes helping, and kids will quickly realize, because they know they have it in their verbal language system, wait a minute, we need something here. Rita is helping. Okay? Or Rita will, in the future, Rita will help. Okay? And we can separate out the difference between a verb, a suffix that's for a verb, Rita acts, versus a suffix that's for a noun. There are 3 acts in the play that pluralizes a noun. And so you can begin to, again, pull in your word study to help support these grammar lessons. The reason we like manipulatives is because it makes this visual metaphor that kids can latch onto, and it just makes it so much clearer for them. And if they're not getting it, they have a lot of opportunity to keep moving things around, right? They can keep building and making sentences, and that really will help them gain understanding. And we don't want to skip this manipulative part. It makes a big, big difference.
I just want to say too, there's a nice example on our Instagram page and Facebook page of kind of working through and using students' verbal language systems where they already are very aware of a lot of tense and probably use tense relatively correctly in their spoken language, to help them start to kind of pull in these suffixes and notice how these things affect the building of a sentence and the spelling, etc. Rita had created, was working on creating a little sort of chart and page to be working on tense with one of her students, and it's on our Instagram from like 3 or 4 days ago.
Right. And sometimes too, we'll kind of, sorry guys. Okay, I can't find my page now because I moved around. Oh, sometimes we will kind of talk about this idea of what's now versus what's future versus what's past. And we'll create some sentences like I act, I will act. If it's ongoing, I'm acting. Or if it's past, I acted. If it's past ongoing, I was acting. And then we can do the same thing, changing verb suffixing. If it's she runs, she will run, she is running, she runs, she ran, she was running. Okay, so you can do that kind of sentence creating, which is really a helpful strategy when working with kids. And we do it with kids all the time. So let's go to page 9. Time for your practice. You have the very first sentence. Kanika takes mom her dinner. Now, I just want to tell you, we threw this in here to throw you off once again. In fact, let's skip that one. Let's do the next one. We'll come back to the first one. Let's do Jeff vigorously paddled the canoe. So I would like you first, I'd like you to decide what's the subject, what's the action verb, and what is the direct object? And how would you mark them? Okay, subject, action verb, direct object. So first, I would like you to tell me what's the subject.
Can you show the verb tense chart again? Someone wants to know if the one you were just showing on the previous page. I think we also have a nice example on our Instagram if you want to find it there.
Are we talking about this?
Yeah, I think someone wanted to see that. I don't know if that's what they meant, but that's the only chart I think you showed. We will be creating a chart that has to do with verb tense too later on today, hopefully soon. That may help with some verb tense ideas.
This got a little, sorry, we got some smudges in between.
You can always take a screenshot, but you'll also receive the recording, so you can come back and kind of screenshot anything you want off the recording as well. All right. People are answering your question about the subject, so I'd flip back.
I gotta find where I am again.
We use these little rocket books, and then it's easy to get lost because we kind of keep all of our work inside of them.
Okay. Sorry, that didn't come out very well. My black must be fading. Jeff vigorously paddled the canoe. You identified the subject as Jeff. What is the verb?
Nice.
Paddled. And paddled what? The direct object answers what? Right.
Sometimes I'll say to kids too, do we have a direct object? Do we have something that answers paddled what? Because some sentences don't, you know, as we talked about before. Sometimes you don't have a direct object after your verb.
Maura, do you remember where we talk about articles?
I think that we circle back to that when we talk about adjectives and adverbs on the next page.
Okay. Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something. All right, and sometimes at this point, even though kids don't know what it's called, we'll talk about what we think the other words are doing. So I might help them with this. That vigorously describes how he paddles, and the describes canoe. And the great part about this is you don't have to know what it's called to be talking about drawing arrows.
And
This
that
is
takes
very,
us back
very
to
functional.
function. Yep.
Yeah, there's your function. Okay, so let's go back to the first sentence now. Kanika takes mom her dinner. So I would like you to mark that again. This one's tricky, just tell you. And first tell me, what is the subject? Okay, Kanika is our subject. What is the verb? Okay. So takes is our verb. Now, this is why it's tricky. Think about the meaning. She takes what? Or is she taking a who. We're talking about taking, right? Very good. Everyone got that one. It's dinner. Now, she takes what? She takes dinner. So, mom here is what we call an indirect object.
You can
Moore
show
likes to do
Yeah.
a little upper bracket on the indirect object.
flip the direct object marking on its head.
He flips it. Okay. How could you write this sentence in another way so you would know that Kanika takes the dinner and that mom is referring to
Who got the dinner?
who got the dinner? Right. Kanika takes dinner to her mom. So if you, this is just a way, a shortened way we can say to mom. Okay. And it isn't even really Kanika's dinner, it's her mom's dinner, right?
Well, and also mom is a name here, so it's to mom.
Yeah, it's to
Yeah.
mom. I just want you thinking about that sometimes when I'm trying to decide, wait a minute, is this a direct object that answers who, or is this an indirect object? I think about the meaning, and the meaning will help direct you where that goes back to function. If we were just trying to figure out, hey, one of these words, they're both nouns, they both could be either a direct object or indirect object, I don't know. You always have to go back and ask yourself, what is this sentence really saying? It's not really saying she's taking her mom somewhere. She's saying she's taking dinner to someone. That's what the sentence is saying. And that's what it can help you decide that this is actually the indirect object. Now, what do I do with indirect objects with kids?
Yes.
I do exactly what I'm doing with you now. I wait till they come up and we talk about them. And then I wait till they come up again. And then I remind them that we talked about them. And this is a real we do it thing, because it can take a while to get these indirect objects in.
Yes, Nalani had asked that question, like which level would it really be in? I mean, you could decide to teach it in level 2 when you teach direct object, but we find, especially with the struggling learner, that it tends to really confuse things, and direct object is something we want to be really solid. So we focus on direct object, and then you'll have sentences come up that have direct objects in them, and we just take that opportunity to teach it. You can add a portion to your LA binder, to your page about direct objects, about the indirect, practice them a little bit, let it go, teach it again if it comes up again, because really direct object is the piece we want to be the most solid, and sometimes it can kind of cause some interference.
Right. So yeah, and Claire like often says, stop talking, you're making it worse. When it comes to grammar, the more you talk, the worse it gets. Like, it's true, like there's so many things you could keep pulling in. But again, we don't want to leave you high and dry. So you come upon this sentence and think, I've never heard this before. But I do want you to know it's a big hairy monster that you're tackling to the ground, and you're just not going to have this perfect first this, then that. Doesn't matter what we choose, things are going to come up and it's going to throw you off, So more than anything, just know that there are certain things that you can weave in as appropriate and as your kids can handle it. And I think this is the important thing about an individual class like this, is different kids can handle different amounts of information based on, how much background knowledge they have and their language skills. So, the child you're working with, and each one is different. And so, I have kids that I can go off on these tangents on some of this information and they're like fine with it. And I have other students that I just say, just trust me on this one. I'm not going to bog you down with this right now. Let's move on. Keep focusing on meaning. Just trust me on this. It's really like saying to her mom. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Here's your challenge sentence.
This is also from Animal Farm.
Also from Animal Farm. Maura did a little video of video outtakes for our
little trailer we have on
trailer you made. I think it's on our website. And this example is on Facebook, and this example is in there talking about Clover's great foreleg. And we really wondered if anyone would take the grammar class after seeing we're teaching about Clover and her great foreleg. Which of course means I just gave away the subject.
No, you didn't. You didn't say what the subject was.
Okay, subject, action verb, direct object. It's kind of another tricky one.
People are answering. Nice
Okay,
job.
so they're saying the subject is Clover. The verb is made. The action verb is made.
And you can label that if you want, as we start to learn some of these different terminology words for verbs, like I might write AV to determine that it's an action verb as opposed to other kinds we will be learning. Yes.
I want you to know, you'll be happy to know, we have two answers going, and you will be happy to know that I really puzzled with this one. This is the kind of sentence that throws me off, okay? Because is it a sort or is it a wall?
Someone said, whoever is saying sort is someone who potentially understands some things about prepositional phrases. And if you understand some things about prepositional phrases, this might be throwing you off.
Right. So one concept is, and it's legitimate. Let's use two different colors here, okay? One concept is that this is the direct object, and of wall is possibly creating part of these phrases, okay? I'm going to bracket off all the phrases, okay? Because this could be a preposition. So this theory is this is your direct object, and that's a preposition.
That's a prepositional phrase describing.
Prepositional phrase. Preposition starting a prepositional phrase. The other theory is that wall is your direct object, and sort of is.
I bracketed that together.
I know, but I'm just kind of putting quotes around it because it's a colloquialism.
Yeah. I almost wish it was hyphenated.
It's kind of like, kind of. Right?
Yeah, I would want it to be
He made a kind of wall. She made a sort of wall.
It feels descriptive.
It feels like it's acting like an adjective describing the wall. So how do we decide? Well, let's go back to meaning.
Look at what Emily just wrote.
What did she say?
Read what Emily just wrote.
It feels more like how it functions in language.
That feels more like how it functions in language. She wrote that right as you said, how do we decide? Yes. Exactly.
Yep. Right. I did the same thing. I felt like initially sort seemed to make sense to me that that would be the direct object. And I did the same thing. I saw the of wall and it instantly started bracketing.
No, I think she meant the sort of is how it feels more in language.
Yes.
Hard to know which one she was referring to.
Yes. Well, I'm just saying, and it's true. Sort of is the way we talk. It's sort of the way we say things, right?
Oh, you were referring to Valerie's comment. Makes more sense, but I was thinking of it in grammatical terms.
I was.
Exactly.
Yes. So he made we're really meaning wise saying, what was she doing with her leg? She was making a wall. And of course, we've taken this out of context from the whole story. This is the beauty of doing this with a copy work passage that is a paragraph within a story you're reading. You know that Clover was actually acting as a protector. And I think Clover's also a big mule or something, which we don't have all that, but that's why she has a great foreleg. And so she's creating this protective, not a protective sort, but a protective wall. Okay. So the meaning function will always drive the car here. And it's a great example of it.
Yeah, we had a big debate. So we don't want anyone feeling bad if you thought it was one thing versus another. We had a long debate about this one last year. Long. Long. Yeah.
And again, that's why we have these kinds of sentences in here, because I hate it when I do some grammar program and it has all these really simple, obvious sentences. And then I go and try to apply it elsewhere And I'm like, wait a minute. I don't know what to do. So we really didn't want you to feel that. We want you to feel it now. Feel all the pain up front. Because it does help you know you are going to have these kinds of debates. There will be times where you say to your kids, I have no idea. And the debate is worth so much. Not so much, what do I call it? What is it doing? Right? So, what is them?
Yeah, it's the object of the preposition around
Yeah.
in the prepositional phrase around them. And if you want a part of speech, it's a pronoun, I believe. But
Yeah,
you know,
right.
but again, we don't label every single word usually because we're going for these functional parts.
Right. So what we would do instead is we would say around them, what is that describing?
Yeah, that is a chunk. It's a part of a sentence. When we're getting to prepositional phrases, we haven't really gotten there yet. But it's more important to know what that chunk is describing because that chunk is all doing the same thing.
Everything's kind of pointing to this wall. Would you
Mhm.
agree?
Well, Clover made, let's
Could
see,
be around
a sort of wall around them. That's where she
Oh,
made
could be
the
where
wall.
she made
So
it.
I think it's
You're
sort.
right. You're
Or I
right.
think it's made, sorry.
Yep, it's made.
And then with
That's not a
with
verb. That's Rita making.
how she made, so that's also describing made.
Oh, well, yes, because the answer is always adjective, not adverb.
No, always adverb.
Not adjective. This is the thing I have to keep learning here, folks. I always want things to be adjectives, and they're always adverbs.
We'll get to this on the very next page, but this is a hard thing to do, is to kind of ask what everything is doing. It can be, it's important because it's necessary for being able to build these kinds of sentences in your own writing and also comprehending these kinds of sentences in your reading. But it also gets tricky, and there are kinds of questions you can ask yourself. That's what I always do to help you arrive at the answers if you can, or at least your theory. Sometimes it's not always, doesn't always feel like an answer, you know, but these kinds of things are where the deep learning happens, is in these conversations and debates.
Yep. And I believe that, and I tell students that all the time.
Oh yeah, actually, that's a good idea, Ashley. She said, can you erase it and just mark what we would have kids mark at this point? Which basically, she probably would take something like this and she would bracket off the prepositional phrases for them. If you were looking at a sentence of this complexity, because your child, you know, you only would be looking at this complexity if your child is reading at this level. And if they are, but you haven't learned prepositional phrases, I'd take a sentence like this. I'd bracket all the prepositional phrases off and say, don't worry about anything in the brackets.
I might even, if I had figured it out ahead of them, which doesn't always happen, I might even have done this. That kind of is like saying like a wall. You know? So I would have done around them with a grade 4 like. And I would say, okay, so ignoring the brackets, where's your subject, action, verb, direct object?
Yep.
I put like in kind of the wrong place.
I don't know that I would write that. Yeah, that's kind of confusing. But.
Kind of.
I don't think kind of clears anything up. To me, it's the same problem. Anything with the word of creates the same question.
People say kind of, though, a lot more.
People write kinda, and that might feel like a single word, and then that eliminates the of problem. But
I tell my students that of is the worst word in English.
Claire says of is the worst word in English. That's what she tells her students.
Yeah, people are saying kinda. Yes, I write that. Yeah. Kind of like kinda.
Kind of like it.
It's kind of like kinda, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Anything with of causes problems. Yeah. It's really true. Okay.
Oh, type
great.
of. Yeah.
So that is how. Oh, somewhat. Nice suggestion. Someone said you could put somewhat.
Or type of.
Or maybe you could change the word sort of.
The problem with type of is type feels.
It's the same thing as
Yeah.
Of. No, but Mom, instead of sort of, you could write sorta. Made a sorta wall.
Yeah, that's true.
Alrighty, are we ready to move on to, do you want to show them the Grammar Bugs page 12?
Yes, just to catch you up on some things that are in your Grammar Bugs curriculum that would go with what we talked about. We have page 10 is the page on subject, verb, direct, object, has a little octopus. Page 12 talks about transitive and intransitive verbs. Too bad I didn't show you that when you were asking more about it. And page 21 has this kind of breakdown of the noun that I was demonstrating for you. Okay? So those are just all some inkling pages that are in Grammars 1 if you have that program. Okay.
Apparently, sorta is in the dictionary, according to Linda.
Nice.
Interesting.
Okay.
Alrighty. Everyone turn to page 10. We are moving on to level 3. Do you want to stop sharing your screen too so that
Oh,
it'll
I'm sorry.
go back to
Everyone doesn't have to watch me clean.
Perhaps not. Okay. So level 3 we are learning, so far we've learned what we call, we've learned the basic components of a sentence, subject and verb. And then beyond that, we learned one sentence type, our first sentence type, which Rita had just showed you an inkling page that showed that sentence type is subject plus action verb plus direct object. And in level, yep.
I just realized we never had them make a sentence like that. Sorry, I forgot to.
Oh, we did not.
Remember to do it. Remember to do it on yours.
Yeah, I'll have them build some sentences here. Well, I think you will, or maybe I will. No, I will, and you will. Okay. So we're learning our second sentence type. And if you look at the top, it says that you'll be teaching something called linking verbs. Our second sentence type, I'm going to share my screen here. Oh, no. There we go. I'm actually going to flip this like she did. Our second sentence type, again, has these 3 pieces. Every sentence type will have to have subject and verb. So it starts with the subject. And really, these sentence types differ by kind of verb that's showing up. And the kind of verb that shows up may determine or always determines what comes after that verb. So that's where we get these kind of sentence structures or these sentence types, we call them. So we've learned subject, action verb, and action verbs are often followed by direct objects. And we have a second type called subject linking verb, which you may have heard of. And linking verbs are followed by not direct objects, but what we call subject. I'm going to see if I can write out this whole word. Complement. A subject complement. I'm going to push that up. I think actually if I have this white background, it doesn't. Can you guys, one sec, I'm going to pin my video so that I can see what you're seeing. There we go. All right, so subject, linking verb, subject complement is our second sentence type. And there's a little bit of information on your handout about linking verbs. So a linking verb, often abbreviated to LV, is something that shows what people call state of being. They are often these to be verbs you may have heard people talk about, are also called linking verbs. And the job of a linking verb is basically to link the subject with something about the subject, often called the subject complement. I tell students these linking verbs, they are hard to find because we get so ingrained in this idea of verbs being actions and we're looking for these action type words, and then you get these sentences that appear to have no action and yet feel like a complete thought. And those are typically sentences that have a linking verb. And the job of the linking verb, or you can think of the action of the linking verb, is to link or to act like an equal sign. I always say its action, it does have an action, its action is equaling. That's what its action is. So really, functionally, all it's doing is trying to kind of link two ideas, which is why we call it a linking verb. It's the subject over here and something we're saying about the subject over here, okay? So you may get a sentence. I'm probably gonna make sure I'm using the right marker for the right thing here. You may get a sentence like, I don't know if they have a sentence on here for you, but I'll go ahead. Oh yeah, they have a couple for you. So you may get a sentence like, Charlie is your friend. Okay, and I've sort of spaced it out so you can see how it follows here. Our subject is Charlie. Those are becoming easier to find now. But really, what Charlie does, if I say who or what is my sentence about Charlie? What is Charlie doing? Well, he's not really doing anything. He's more being something, or he's sort of equaling something. Charlie equals your friend. So there is really no doing or no action going on here. The action is equaling. And I have kids label these linking verbs. I mean, often we'll still squiggle them. In fact, I should have probably done the squiggle first. We'll still squiggle them. And then I'll always over top, we'll draw this little equal sign because that helps them really kind of see what kind of the quote unquote action is of a linking verb. And then I like to mark the subject complements. We have this sort of little special marking system we use for a subject complement. I'm running out of space though, so I'm gonna erase my to be here. To be or not to be? We draw this little kind of like, I don't know, pinning bracket from the subject over to the subject complement. I should have moved the subject complement to the word friend. Okay, so that's kind of our marking system for a subject complement, is that really I'm linking these two ideas, Charlie and friend. Charlie equals friend, okay? As we've kind of talked about before, the word your is one of those little possessive pronouns that's describing friend. That's its job here. And friend is our subject complement. Now you'll notice about halfway down your page, on page 10, it says that the subject complement refers back to the subject and can be either a noun or an adjective. So your subject complement can be either of these things, noun or adjective. Okay, and I'll give you another example. So in Charlie is your friend, what is the word friend? Is friend a noun or an adjective? It is a person, place, thing, so it is a noun. You could also have sentences like this. Charlie, since we're talking about him, is, or another word in here, very happy. Charlie is our subject. Still use that same linking verb. We'll look at what linking verbs, what some other linking verbs may be in a minute. Ooh, really gotta make sure I'm using the right marker here. Acting like that equal sign. Charlie equals what? He equals happy. So my subject complement is the word happy. Now, happy is not a person, place, thing, or idea. It is, in fact, more of a describing word to tell me, you know, how Charlie is feeling or Charlie's mood, etc. It is not a person, place, thing, or idea. So this would be an example of still a subject complement. That's its function within the sentence, but its part of speech is adjective. And what is the word very doing? Well, it's describing happy. How happy? Very happy, which actually makes it an adverb. Speaking of adjectives and adverbs, we do kind of go into adjectives and adverbs a little bit at this point. So I'm going to pull down this sheet that you've seen Rita brought out. Oh, sorry, I'm sliding things everywhere. Rita brought this out earlier. I just have mine in kind of a little page protector here. She added noun. Pronouns can replace nouns. Verb. Every sentence needs to have a noun and verb. The subject is always a noun. The verb tells us what our subject's doing. That tends to be an action. And now you can fill in some of these other parts of speech. This is sort of a good time to do it because you start ending up with more of them showing up in your sentences if you're working more from younger text forward. If you were working with older text from the start, they would have kind of been there from the start. But this is a good time to add adjective and adverb because we're seeing a lot of them now. Adjectives, notice that little arrow connecting it to noun. Adjectives always describe nouns. Adverbs are also, they're similar because they're also describing terms and they describe verbs, but they can also describe, and I think we have this written on here. Yes, we do. They can also describe other adjectives or other adverbs. So in my sentence, Charlie is very happy. Happy was an adjective. Very was a word that describes an adjective. And so adverb it becomes an adverb because it's describing an adjective. Adverbs are kind of like the catch-all of parts of speech. They describe so many things that often if you're really struggling to figure out how something is functioning in a sentence, it's very likely that it's an adverb. And we say that all the time because it describes verbs, it describes adjectives, it describes other adverbs. So they're kind of like that. If I have absolutely no idea and I'm trying to label the part of speech of something, it is very likely that it's an adverb. It's not a foolproof plan, but
Corey Stamper says it's the junk drawer of parts of speech, right? That everything gets thrown in that.
I couldn't remember what she said.
Yeah, it's such a great line.
The junk drawer of grammar. So at this point, do you want to pull this back down? Sorry. At this point, what I might do is I might put a couple, I'm trying to find a tiny marker or something here. I might also note that you can have little article words or possessive pronouns that can be adjectives. And sometimes I'll write some of these, like adjectives describe nouns. We think of describing words as adjectives that are big descriptive things like brown or,
gigantic.
Gigantic, thank you. Of course, I can't think of a single other adjective I've ever used in my entire life. But I also might throw up here that the, and an, those are little articles that count as adjectives. And I also might throw in some of those possessive pronouns to remind kids that words like my and your and his and her and their and our, et cetera, can be.
Can you zoom in on that more?
Well, yeah. Oh, well, it's really tiny, but I'm not going to be able to see it because the camera's not so great at that zoom in.
Okay. I just gave him an idea, though, what you were writing.
I was saying it as I was writing. So the, and then any possessive pronoun. So something that possesses the noun that, kind of denotes who owns that thing you're about to name. My dog, your brother, his aunt, her notebook, their house, our vacation. Okay. All right. So that's a good point at which we kind of bring in some of that information. You also might notice, I don't know, actually, did you talk about this?
Maura, I just want you to know that there's some discussion about this whole idea that an adverb can describe an adjective. And Linda was noting that she drew an arrow from adverb to adjective because it can describe an adjective and it can describe a verb.
Yes, and didn't we redo this page and include an arrow that did that?
I don't know. We probably did it somewhere, but not on this page.
I know. I feel like I have a memory of us doing that.
You can draw that on.
Not on my
you have the arrow going from the adverb to the verb, and you can draw an arrow that it also can describe an adjective. Thank you.
I don't know how you would draw an arrow that it can describe itself, but maybe you can somehow do that as well.
One of those little, refresher arrows, right?
Right. Yes. It describes many things, just not nouns.
I might have interrupted you. You might have been about to say, a noun is coming, a noun is coming.
I usually do, but I wasn't actually about to say that. So one thing I do, we don't have it over here is the only thing. Sometimes I'll have an extra, I don't know, little post-it that I kind of stick out over here. and I'll write these words like and the, and I sort of write that they're often kind of like, I'll have like a little speaky bubble. And they are saying, you know, that, oh gosh, I don't have enough space. A noun is coming. And that's something I'll teach kids, that at any point when we see a word like an, or the, it's giving us kind of a grammar clue. It's a really nice little grammar clue that the word following, or a word down the road from that little article, sometimes these are called determiners, we know they act like adjectives, that they are coming before a noun. So if you see an, or the, if you have students who struggle to identify where nouns are in a sentence, these are little clue words that tell us a noun is coming. Be careful though, because possessive pronouns can also do that. So I might draw another little speechy bubble coming off of my possessive pronouns. They do the same thing. And then though, anything that's a name won't have a possessive pronoun or a article before it, and those are still nouns. So they tell us nouns are coming. They always tell us a noun is coming. They don't tell us every noun, right? Because not every noun will have one. Because I could have a sentence like Maura ate pizza, and Maura and pizza are both nouns, neither of which had an article or a possessive pronoun in front of it. But it can be a good way to help kids find some nouns that they may be struggling to find.
So I just want to sorry, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to catch you up on Grammar Bugs 1. Page 22 is an inkling page that looks, kind of helps teach this concept of adjectives and adverbs. Again, we didn't have the arrow on this one either from adverb.
I know, I have a memory of us adding it, but I don't know.
I'm sure we talked about it. And then I just thought I would show you, Maura's been teaching about this subject complement with the linking verb to subject complement. Our second sentence type is page 13. And then we have this, you know, distinction here. And again, anything you see that looks Post-it like in our bug work, you can always be creating pages like that, building them in your students' workbook. And then just another thing to catch you up on, some grammar programs that you may already be using might refer to these as predicate adjectives or predicate nominatives. And I have a particular distaste for this because I find kids feel really bogged down, and somehow in the midst of all this labeling, they seem to lose the function. I don't know why. I think the nominative to noun just doesn't feel as clear to them. I really like the idea of a subject complement. They kind of get that it's linking to the subject, and then calling that an adjective or noun really draws out the function in a better way. So if you're not in the midst of prior learning and you're choosing between the two, this is our preference. We think it works easier for kids. If you're already been learning this, you can either change or stick with it, but we have a page here for you as well. Okay, just catching up on support there.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going back to my document camera here, because when I'm teaching about this second sentence type, can I talk? Second sentence type of subject linking verb and subject complement, we run into this problem of talking about these linking verbs. Their job is to link. Their action is kind of like equaling. They don't look like action words. They're very hard to find. They're called to be verbs, which I'll write again up here. But you rarely see the word be. They are always conjugated, and so you don't really see the word be. So if you tell your students, oh, it's a version of the word be, that can be kind of equally unhelpful. Like, you're not really seeing that word a whole lot, so it's hard to recognize. These are hard to recognize. However, as Rita's been saying, these are students who, all of our kids have been, relatively functional talkers for many years of their life, and are using these linking verbs all the time in their own verbal language. And so they actually do have an awareness of all of the linking verbs. It's just not an awareness of how it connects in written language or in grammar. So we try to use what they know to help them remember what they don't know or what is new information. And that's pulling on their language system that's already in place. So what I'll do is I'll create a page like this with students, and this ends up being a great LA Binder page to throw in your LA Binder, and it's something that they are creating as a product while you're teaching. So what I do is I set up, and I'll usually label this, actually not to be, I wrote that at the top there. I might label this to be verbs, but probably I would label it linking verbs. And I'll say, you know what, we are going to use what you already know to make a chart of all the linking verbs that are out there. And I bet you already know them all. And my kids always say, I have no idea. I don't know what the linking, and I'm like, nope, I bet you 100% you will be able to fill in all of these linking verbs. What we're going to do is we are going to create kind of a fake sentence to help us out. And we're going to use one of these words on the side to be our subject. We will fill in the linking verbs as we go. And I'm going to stick a subject complement on the other side. So our subject, we will fill in one of these words on the side. It will either be I, you, he, she, or it, we, or they. We're going to figure out what the linking verb is, which is acting like a big equal sign. And I'm going to throw a subject complement at the end. I'm just going to write the word happy because it's easy, and we use that one a lot. You guys see that? You see everything on there?
Or I just want you to be aware of time.
Okay. All right, so what I say is, let's start with I. And all we're going to do is we're going to figure out what the linking verb would be if I use the word I, and I want to say something about being happy. And we're going to figure out what that linking verb would be in the present tense if I'm talking about right now, in the past tense if I'm talking about something that I already felt, and in the future if I'm talking about something that I will feel at some point later on. Okay, so if I'm going to fill in the sentence with I, how would I say I equal happy? And they're like, oh, I am. How would I say it if I am happy now and I was also happy yesterday? What would I say then? I blanked happy. I equaled happy. What if I'm not happy yet? But I will be. I will be happy. All right, let's fill in for the word you. You equal happy. How would we say that for right now? You are. They kind of start to get into this pattern. They realize, I know this. I would say you are happy. What if I was talking about you yesterday? You were happy. What about you tomorrow? You will be happy. Let's pick one of these because all of these fall kind of on the same slot. We could be talking about a boy, a girl, or a thing. So she. Let's do she is. Past, she was. Future, she will be. What if we're talking about we? We are happy today. We were happy yesterday. We will be happy tomorrow. And what about they? They are happy today. They were happy yesterday. They will be happy tomorrow. We note that the word be, these are all versions of the word be, but the word be really shows up only in this future tense, right? And we also note that the future tense always is the same. You don't have to really worry about your conjugation over there because it's always will be. And then sometimes I'll have kids go through, I can't use a highlighter on here, but I might have them go through and find just the different versions of the word, of the linking verb that they could see. They could see am, they could see was, they could see are, were, is. Was is a repeat, are is a repeat, were, are, were. So you'll see am, was, are, were, or is. And sometimes we'll just highlight so they can see that there's really only like 5 of them plus the will be's in the future. And now we've created this chart because they took part in creating it themselves. They are much more likely to recognize these words And then we spend time building sentences with our own language that fit this second sentence type of subject, linking verb, subject, complement. So I'm going to have all of you right now jot one in the margins of your, jot one or two in the margins of your notes. Try to make a sentence that has a subject, a linking verb. It could be present, past, or future tense. I'd stick with present or past because future tense gets into something Rita's going to teach in a minute. And a subject complement, and label those with our little marking system.
So there was a comment about a child who struggles with verb tense in the verbal language system. And what I will tell you is teaching this through writing and reading will actually help clean up the grammar in her verbal speech. So I find much more success in working on these. I have a student who's very similar, and we started really focusing on writing sentences with the tenses that he was struggling with, the verb tense he was struggling with, and it just really cleaned up his speech and his writing. So writing is the way to go. It's good that you're working on it here.
Angela just asked a great question, which leads us right into page. So if you're writing some of your sentences, if you want, you can share your sentences in the chat or not. Just write them for yourself. I would also recommend marking them. And Rita is going to teach about our third sentence type, which will kind of answer Angela's question about will be.
Right. So we are going to be now on page 11. And I want you to know we're going to be referencing page 12, which actually in our bug program is an Inkling page. I didn't pull it out to show you because you have it with you. You'll see that page 12 is a Venn diagram between what verbs are linking verbs and which ones are helping verbs. We're about to talk about helping verbs. Helping verbs are split also, there's kind of a subgroup of them called modals, and modals affect mood. In fact, wasn't that a word study thing we did, Tracy, where modal kind of meant mood? So to say that I will help you and say I might help you is totally different kind of expression from me, right? Right? So it really affects kind of response and mood. You must put on your shoes because we're leaving is a lot different than you can put on your shoes because we're leaving. Right? So anyway, those are important words that kind of affect mood. They all fall in this category of what we call helping verbs, and that's what we're about to talk about here on page 11. So I'm going to switch to my document camera again, and we're going to talk about our next sentence type. Maura's already giving you a little bit of a demo of this in her future tense work she was doing, where we can have a subject plus a linking verb plus a main verb, and that actually can have any kind of ending. It could end in a prepositional phrase. It might have a direct object. You know, it could have various things. So I don't think it can have a subject complement, can it? I will be grumpy. Yeah, I think it can. It can have a subject complement.
No, it can because it's still a linking verb.
Yeah, it's still a linking verb, right? So it can end up acting as an action verb and have a direct object. It can end up acting as a linking. It could. I will eat popcorn.
No, you're saying the helping verb will. Yeah, the helping verb will can do different things depending on the verb.
I'm saying this combination, you can end up with different endings. That's my point I'm making. So I could say, Rita might help who?
Wait.
Maura.
You wrote linking verb though, and you wrote might under linking verb. Might is a helping verb.
Yeah, I had written. So let's just be clear that sometimes I like to call all linking and helping verbs linking verbs. However, I find my students, and that's something I did get from Michael Clay Thompson's program, my students often differentiate and have to differentiate the difference between a linking verb and a helping verb. A helping verb is still linking to a main verb.
I
Still doing the
separate
linking
the
job.
terms, but
Yes. So the linking verb is kind of like the big category, and within the linking verb category, you can have helping verbs. Okay. So what I was trying to express is that you could have any different kind of ending. So how about
Can I-
Rita is going home? I have a different kind of ending than, say, a direct object or a subject complement. What more?
I was just going to say, because people are asking for clarification. So the third sentence type, and you'll see it on page 11, is subject, helping verb, main verb. Rita sometimes will use the
Yes, I'm
term
sorry,
linking verb.
I miswrote that. Let me just
Yeah.
change.
I would just rewrite it. She sometimes uses the term linking verb to mean both. We'll separate them out for you here for clarification.
Okay, there you go.
There you go.
Okay, third type, subject, helping verb, main verb. I actually didn't even realize I do that so often that I didn't even realize I had done it here. So I apologize for that. Okay, so the point I am making here is when we create this sentence type, we have a subject plus a helping verb plus a main verb. Together, they make the verb. The ending of the sentence could end up being many different forms. It could be an object, a direct object. It may end up being a prepositional phrase. It could be...
It could be a subject complement if you have something like will be.
How
But
about
technically will be is one.
grumpy?
Yeah.
Okay, so I might have an adjective.
Well,
No? Okay, Tracy's making a face.
I'm just saying becoming there is functioning as a to-be substitute. That's why it's a linking verb.
It's still a linking verb. So
Right.
it's not, you're saying it's not a main verb.
No,
Well,
I mean, it is.
Okay, we're being functional.
Yeah.
So,
That's why I never put them together. I always separate helping verb and linking verb. Linking verbs can have a future.
but we don't have a sentence type for kids that's helping plus linking. We call it a main verb. Okay, so we're being functional.
Okay.
Um,
I'll stop.
so being functional, this is acting as a main verb. So again, you can really get into the nitty-gritty of what everything is called. So this is actually what Tracy was expressing, and she knows because she's really the grammarian here, is that this together acted like a linking verb, but it doesn't matter. Functionally for kids, what we want them to understand is that you have multiple verbs that can act together in the middle of a sentence.
can you write the sentence, Maura will be upset? So what you can see with the sentence like that is that we were calling will be the future tense of a linking verb. But you all noticed that this linking verb ended up being two words. So really what we have is a helping verb and a main verb, but it's functionally acting like a single linking verb. And you can kind of mark it either way. We tend to, anytime I have two verbs working together, I tend to label it helping verb, main verb, even if those two words are sort of acting like a linking verb, like is becoming or will be. They're sort of acting like a big equal sign. That's kind of how you can test it. Rita equals or will equal grumpy. Maura will be or Maura will equal upset. Those are kind of acting like linking verbs together. But because we have two, I always have kids label helping verb, main verb. And that's kind of what Rita was saying. It's sort of like the functional versus the nitty gritty. Both things are true. So
Right. It's just like we said, sometimes you can call something two things, right? It doesn't make really one of them wrong, but we are trying to get kids to just keep being functional. I put stars around the main verb because it's the star of the show in the sentence. The main verb in Maura's example was kind of causing it to be a linking verb.
Same with becoming.
That kind of verb. And the main verb in my first sentence, I might help, was causing that to become more of an action verb. Okay, so the main verb's kind of the star of the show here. Does that make sense?
Any questions at this point? Because we know we sort of hopped into a.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I wrote linking verb there.
No, just all of it. It's all very confusing at this point because so many things are layering now.
Right. Things are starting to layer. They're getting confusing. Just so you know, we do have a page on this, and it's really showing you that this to be determined can be anything. And this is important to know because, again, at this stage, you're going to be creating some bugs, and you might not really know what to call what you put in the bug bottom. And it's okay at this point. You don't have to know what it's called, although you might recognize it easily if it's acting as a direct object or if it ends up acting more like a subject complement. Okay? As these two were.
So Ashley said, I was kind of answering some questions here. What was Tracy's explanation about becoming? Okay, so Ashley said, so the helping plus the main can equal either a linking or an action. And the phrasing of that question is a little bit confusing, but I think Rita's about to talk about how helping verbs and main verbs they kind of cross territory a little bit, and she will show you a chart on page 12, which I think will answer that question.
Yes, right, which I had talked about before. So what you see is, if you look at your page 12, I'll put it in my document camera, so we're looking at it together. What you see is that you have, let's put this up here, okay? Okay, you have linking verbs and they include all of these verbs. Okay? If you notice when Maura said will be is a linking verb. Okay? They can also, some of those words will also act as helping verbs. Those connect, these helping verbs connect with, these helping verbs that are in this circle are what connect with main verbs. And when they connect with main verbs, that main verb will determine whether what you may add to the end of it. I could say, I am eating. And that's intransitive. I didn't have to add any bottom to my bug, okay? But I might say, I am a woman. No, I am eating. I am eating peas. Thank you. I forgot what I was doing there. I'm eating peas, which I don't really like peas, but okay. I'm eating peas and they're fresh because that's the only kind I eat. All right. So if I say I am eating peas, I created a direct object. I use my wrong marker, which will be hard to get off if I don't get it off right away. I am eating peas. I might say I am eating quickly. All I did was describe my eating there with an adverb. I am eating in bed. I added a prepositional phrase. Okay.
I was answering a couple questions. People were asking.
I want you to think back before you answer. I want you to think back on the I do it, we do it. A lot of this helping verb work with kids is a lot of we do it. I help them see there are two verbs. But I have to say this, when I have kids start putting sentences and start translating them into bugs, they quickly realize they need two bodies. They will see a sentence like, I am eating peas, and they write they put in the head, and then they say am, they put, they're learning. We've already done what's a linking verb. They put that in a body, and then they see eating, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, I am eating. Oh, that's another verb, and they'll put it in a body again. So they actually don't have as much struggle as it feels as what I've demonstrated here, trying to share this with you. So I have some kids who never use the word helping and they use linking. It just depends on their program. So I unfortunately have gotten very used to using them.
Some programs also use the term auxiliary verb. I mean, there's so many terms out there. Right. Did you show them about the crossing over of to be and how there's those to be substitutes? Because people were wondering about the word becoming that you used in that previous sentence, and this chart kind of shows that.
Yes, it does. These to be substitutes. I'm sorry. That's what you were asking me to look at. Okay. I didn't understand. So yes, we may say a word like feel. Here they are. There are sensory ones like I look, I sound, I smell, I taste, I feel. Those may act as linking verbs. They don't have to, but they might. It appears shiny, or something. I become angry.
Everyone, take your pencils and go ahead and write a little equal sign above those to be substitutes and even maybe the sensory ones. And if you can replace it with the equals, it's kind of functioning like a linking verb. You can decide whether or not you want to label it as such when you're marking sentences. You may decide, well, I would actually, if it's a single word. If it's a helping verb, main verb, I may not. I may stick with helping verb, main verb. But if it's something like she appears angry, that's she equals angry. So
yeah, it really helps if you put an adjective with it. That helps you know you got a linking verb, right? She looks angry. She sounds angry. She smells, I don't know.
Smells delicious. She smells angry.
I was just.
Maybe she has a smile when she's angry. I don't know.
It tastes delicious, right? It smells delicious. It feels soft, right? So there's a lot of things you can put an adjective with it.
And it kind of ends up feeling like it's a link to a subject complement. Mm-hmm. There are some words that
squishy, rose quit, or that's an adverb. Sorry, I always do.
So to answer someone's, I think it was Valerie, maybe's question about the word becoming. Becoming is kind of a to be substitute. Also, that one really feels like one because it's related to that word become, right? Yeah. So that felt more like a linking verb to Tracy. The whole form is becoming felt like, well, that's a linking verb construction. But really, it's also a helping verb, main verb construction. For my students, pretty much any time there's two verbs, I don't really go there. I label it helping verb, main verb.
I really think if we do some of our practice sentences, they'll feel a lot more on top of this.
People ask, I just wanted to note, people ask some really good questions in the chat that are kind of involve longer explanations. And so I was trying to, if you feel like I didn't answer your question, it's probably because I was asking you to put it in the Q&A. So put it there because we will double back on some of these things.
Okay. So we did 3 sentence types today, by the way. We did that subject, action verb, direct object, subject linking verb, subject complement, and now we've added subject helping verb, main verb. Okay.
Lastly, on page 13, I'm going to have you guys do a little bit of marking to help us hammer some of this out. Like we said, we are aware that you may be starting to feel a little shaky, because this third sentence type is where we've kind of combined the most things. Stuff is layering. You now have kind of these tiers where it could be analyzed as this or it could be this. This is why grammar makes some people, want to run away, because it can get complicated. And not just can, it will get complicated.
Yes, it is complicated.
It is complicated. I'm going to move to the side here, actually. I'm going to have you guys look at, I actually didn't write out which ones I was going to have you do. But go ahead and let's mark this.
I think you should do number two for sure.
Oh, you know what? Not all of these. Okay, so if you look at the top where it gives you instruction, not all of the sentences on page 13 are just our third sentence type. It's an in and out. It's kind of anything's fair game at this point. Is any three of the sentence types I think are showing up.
And
Which
more,
one
I'm
that
gonna
you
put
want
up,
to do?
I'm gonna put up the summary of what we've done.
Sure. Oh, I'll stop sharing then. So she's going to show you a couple summary pages first. I'm going to pick
There
few of
yet.
these
I'm
to
not
have us
there
mark. That's okay. I want to write down a few of them to have you mark. She's going to show you Grammar Bugs 2, page 4, I think, right?
Well, that's what I thought I was doing.
Summary of sentence types. The first thing I'll have you mark is the second sentence that says Jeff can paddle very fast. Go ahead and try to mark your subject. Any verb type that we've learned so far, so you're looking for, it could be just an action verb, it could be just a linking verb, or we could have a helping verb, main verb. And whatever comes after will kind of depend on the kind of verb you have. So we could have a direct object, we could have a subject complement, okay? You might just have an adjective or an adverb. So try to kind of mark up that second sentence, Jeff can paddle very fast.
I found it.
Remember, we underline subjects. I'm going to share my screen with you here. We underline subjects. I'll zoom in a little bit. And we squiggle verbs. You would just squiggle both verbs if there's more than one. We do arrows to show adverbs and adjectives to what they are describing. And we have kind of under brackets for direct objects. We have lots of things, lots of little marking systems we've used here. So, subject, Jeff. Oh, did you just steal my screen?
I just wanted to pull up what your three sentence types were. So if you have grammar 2, it's page 4. If this is also in grammar 3, it's page, or Grammar Bugs 3, this is page 7 if you have those programs. These are kind of summary sheets of our sentence types. Subject plus action verb plus direct object, subject plus linking verb plus subject complement, and then the last one, subject helping verb, main verb. So you're in the middle of discovering which one this is, okay?
So how I marked this sentence was subject to Jeff, can and paddle are verbs. And as we get into these verb types, I like to start kind of labeling them. We have a helping verb here and a main verb here. And then this is a main verb that is an action verb. And we know action verbs can take direct objects, but in this sentence, we didn't have one. We actually just have a adjective, fast. No, adverb, sorry. An adverb, fast, and another adverb describing the adverb. And this adverb, if you want, you can draw an arrow back to what it's describing, which to me feels like it's telling me how he paddles, which made it an adverb. Now, you'll notice I made a mistake because I was like, oh, describing word, and I started to just label it as an adjective. The thing that made me realize I was wrong is I have these little questions going on in my head, which is always to say, what is fast telling me? What is it giving me information about? It's telling me how he paddled. Oops, it's describing paddled. Paddled was a verb. That's an adverb. What is very telling me? It's telling me how fast. Fast was an adverb. Adverbs describe adverbs, so that makes very also an adverb. Okay, I'm going to do one more on here for you. Let's go ahead and do the one right under that. Jasmine could probably catch a baseball too. Go ahead and start marking. Oops, probably catch a, is it baseball? Okay. Jasmine is our subject. We have helping verb, main verb going on again in this sentence. Could. Now this one is interesting because our helping verb and main verb aren't next to each other. What does could help? Could what? Could catch. And our verbs were split up by a describing word. What does the word probably describe? I would say catch. We have an adverb. We have a helping verb here. We have a main verb here. Describes, that's an article telling me a noun is coming, so it's always acting like an adjective. She could catch what? A baseball, making that a direct object. You don't have to label everything. I don't always label things other than the verbs, but I do have, for a while, have my students label the kind of verb with these little abbreviations to help them start to muck some of this stuff out. And then we were having a debate about the word to earlier. We thought maybe it was an adverb.
Everything's an adverb.
Yeah. And then I'm going to show you our big fat sentence at the bottom.
Did we have them make any sentences?
Oh, not yet. I guess I should have them do that first. So before we do our big fat sentence at the bottom, I think I did ask them to make a couple, but I will go back and have you do that now. Go ahead and try to build a couple sentences. Try to do at least one that's our subject, helping verb, main verb, and then anything else you want to add to it. And then you may want to kind of do a mixture. Maybe try to write a sentence and then see what you can mark. I'm going to zoom out. Oh, not in. Zoom out slightly. Like I might be like, I'm going to write the sentence, Laura was busy during the class. And just see if I now can, if there's anything in this sentence that I know. Well, I know more as my subject. I know was feels like a linking verb. Equals, and busy must be my subject complement then. During the class, that's a phrase. I don't really know how to do anything with that yet, so I'm just going to leave it off. I'm going to try to make one with a subject, helping verb, main verb. And I'm actually, what I'm going to do is flip back to my page 12 and pick from that list. I often have kids do this. We'll use that, showing it to you again, that helping verb, main verb chart, and we'll use it to help us build some of our own original sentences. So I like some of those modal ones because they kind of change the mood, as it says on there. Helping verbs help the main verb. They can change the mood. They can also affect tense. All right, so I could say something like, Tracy must help us with grammar, because if she doesn't, we might make mistakes. So Tracy, subject, must help. Verb, main verb. Must help who or what? Us. Prepositional phrase at the end there. Okay, so try to use some of those from your list to create. You'll notice that the two B's in the middle, this is something I'm not sure we made clear, but I'm going to do an example sentence here. Those two B's in the middle are in the middle of the Venn diagram because they can be helping or linking depending on what comes next. So what I tell my students is if I have a sentence like Maura is eating versus Maura is hungry, depending on what comes after the linking verb determines whether or not it's a linking verb or if it becomes helping. So Maura is my subject here. Is feels like a linking verb, but what came after it was another verb. So now I've got this helping verb, main verb, as opposed to Maura is, what comes after it is not another verb, but instead noun or adjective. Here we have an adjective, which now makes this, I don't really have space, a subject complement, and I have my linking verb. Construction.
That was a good example there. Let's try our big sentence now. What do you think?
Sure.
That was a good example of sorting through those two.
Yeah, that tends to be how I show kids, is that what comes after it is really what determines what our verb becomes when it's one of those to be's. Or not to be's.
Yes, so Andrea asked, just a reminder, we tend to draw arrows from adjectives to the words they're describing, and most of the time they're adverbs. It is true, you know, you think, oh, it's describing, so your first thought is adjective, and then, you know, really 9 times out of 10 it's an adverb.
Well, maybe more like 7 times out of 10, but
Maybe
yeah.
so. I don't know. It's a lot.
I don't know what the ratio is.
I don't know what it is either.
Okay, and you'll notice I crossed off this first line. You probably don't even have that. I don't.
Yeah, we left it off.
Yeah.
It was causing major.
It's causing major issues. Mostly we don't need it for what we're analyzing at this point. So at this point, you're marking anything you can. Find that subject, find the verb or verbs, could be helping verb, main verb, that goes with your subject. I will bracket off prepositional phrases for you to start. So, oh, and also you're marking subject complements, direct objects. You are using arrows to show describing words. So I'm going to mark off for you, and you can put this on your example too to get out of the way to the more intelligent animals. Also on the farm. And then also on life.
Page, by the way, it's on page 13. Major's speech had given to the more intelligent animals on the farm a completely new outlook on life.
Yeah,
the
bottom
bottom
of those example sentences we were doing. Okay, so I've bracketed off stuff you don't have to care about at this point, and this is probably what I would do with a student with a sentence like this if we hadn't learned prepositional phrases. And now your job is to mark the subject, the verb. You can label those verbs if you want to, direct objects, subject complements, and any adjectives or adverbs with arrows. So I'll give you a moment. Sorry, I'm reading some of your comments. They make me giggle. Lolly, 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 get your adverbs here.
Okay, subject.
All right, guys, what is the subject?
No, I know, I just left this out.
Good job. Although I saw lots of question marks. Yes, what is majors doing? Just telling us which speech or what speech or whose speech, so it's just an adjective. What's our verb or verbs? Very nice.
By the way, when kids are writing and we identify with an arrow that that's saying which speech, whose speech, that does cue them to remember to punctuate and put in the possessive.
Right.
Apostrophe S. So this can have nice influence on editing for that reason.
Do we have a direct object after had given? Had given what? Outlook. Very good. And so what does that mean all these other words I didn't bracket are? Describes outlook. I think completely describes new, and new describes outlook, I think.
Yep. There's agreement over here from Tracy.
Okay.
I was agreeing, but that's not worth as much.
And then, you know, you could try to mark some things inside those prepositional phrases, but I'm leaving that out for now, because why?
Yeah, I'll tell you, the beauty of the bracket is when you say to kids, don't worry about that, it helps them not get thrown off by seeing other nouns or potentially verby looking words or whatever, okay? And so that is another beauty of that. Like they're like, well, there's the word animal. What am I supposed to do with that? And now they know it's in a bracket. I don't have to worry about that yet. And so, but they do recognize it's a noun, you know, which is good, but, but really it's one we kind of want them to ignore at this point. But comprehension wise, once you know it's about the speech that was given, that gave this new outlook, then you can layer in that it went to the more intelligent animals, not to all the animals, only to the more intelligent animals, apparently. Okay.
Yeah, and someone said,
Kind of outlook was an outlook on life. Okay. So that's another thing you could kind of do is you could say, you know, what are those bracketed portions describing? Right.
well, and I think there was some confusion too. Like had given, I said, what was the direct object? Some of you were thinking had given to whom? Oh, it's animals. Well,
'Cause you
remember,
see
if it's had given to animals, that's not a direct object. The question for direct object is had given what? What was given? Animals weren't given, it was something given to them, which gets it kind of out of the way. That to sort of makes it not direct anymore. So what was given, an outlook is what was given. So that caused confusion because there was sort of this many inserted phrases before you even got to that, so quote unquote direct object, right? It's directly what was given, but it's not so direct right after that verb in the sentence, right? So,
and Maura, will you put that back up for a minute? And the other thing is, it's not unusual for our kids, if you ask, you know, if they struggle with comprehension, you can see where the grammar here could really have an impact. Like they might think that somebody was given animals. Right? And that kind of problem happens all the time with our kids. And then once you really hear what they're thinking a sentence means, you realize that, you know, how the complexity of the sentence really was difficult for them to comprehend. So
Andrea said,
what's really important about
how
that.
would you explain the concept of majors with it being a possessive noun adjective? Basically, I just always go back to function. If we've identified that speech is the subject, then we just ask, okay, well, and now we've noticed there's a word before speech, so what is that doing? Well, it's telling us whose speech, which means it's describing speech, which means it's an adjective. And then we might notice, oh yeah, hey, look, there's this possessive S, which means this is a possessive word, but we just go back to the function of it. Is it an article adjective for outlook?
It could have been the word his speech.
Yep.
That it was identified as whose.
Completely is an adverb for new. New is an adjective for outlook. Correct. Good job, guys. Is an article adjective. Yeah, so you can call them article adjectives if you want. I just refer to them all. I do tell kids they're called articles or determiners. You know, there's whatever terminology you prefer at some point, and then basically from then on, I'm always saying adjective.
Well, and you know what? And mostly I'll cue them. Like, what does this tell you? A noun is coming, a noun is coming. And that's kind of what they really get into more than anything. Oh, I know a noun's coming because I see that. So yeah. I know it's going to be describing a noun. So that little phrase kind of, again, just keeps giving them.
Yeah, sometimes I'll draw. I didn't draw it today. I should have, but I'll draw like a little like trumpet and it'll be like, dur, 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 a noun is coming on our LA binder page. And
yeah,
so
right.
I
missed your trumpet, Maura.
I'm sorry. Not my trumpet.
Okay, so at even splitting the class in 3, we still ran over. So let's get to our questions. So Tara,
sorry, put them up yet.
Tara said, I'm curious if the team is familiar with the program No Red Ink and what your thoughts and feelings are about using it with students. I'm not familiar with No Red Ink.
I'm not either.
So I'd love to hear more about that. Maybe you could share that with us when we talk in the future. So I like the title, but I don't know what it does. So mostly function, right? And we just have to keep, you know, otherwise you get buried. You get buried in it all, you know, and just keep paying attention to function. So if that program is doing that, I would, I might like it.
When you're evaluating a program, yeah, look at whether or not they're kind of just zipping to labeling everything with parts of speech or not. So that's kind of our criteria. what does the term copy work? Oh yeah. Well, you talk a little bit about copy work, but not too much, unfortunately, because for other questions.
Yeah, it's kind of not what the class is about. But when we refer to copy work, we refer to the weekly language arts activity of taking a passage from text, reading it, analyzing it, maybe doing some pre-work. We call it intentional copy work when we do some pre-work, like looking at the grammar or looking at spelling. And then kids actually copy the passage using their best writing skills, and they work on making some of these underlying skills automatic. So
we have a whole class that delves into how we teach copy work and making it intentional and helping kids develop this kind of automaticity of sort of all of these underlying skills we want happening when they read and write, including things like syntax and grammar skills. And that is called Roots Entwined, which we're in the middle of right now. It has like 2 semesters, a fall and a spring. So we're sort of starting our spring semester now, and you'll be able to sign up again for next year's this summer. So.
And I just did a talk about that with Brave Writers Arrow and Boomerang class, and it has made me think that we should probably get some information up about it to some of our followers.
Well, and I think that Facebook Live is up on the Arrow Boomerang.
It's a private.
Yeah, I couldn't share it. I wanted to share it on our page, and I couldn't.
Yeah, we can't do it.
Bummer.
Defina says, can we use the Wilson readers? This is a good one for you, Maura. Can we use the Wilson readers for this grammar analysis of subject verb, or is it more for phonics?
I assume you mean like their sentences and stuff that are in there. Yeah, I do use them for grammar, especially if I'm, needing some content and wanting kids to be doing a lot of marking. Those sentences are good. You just have to know that the Wilson readers aren't structuring this. They're structuring the sentences that they use from a lens of, is this controlled text or not? They are not considering necessarily the grammar structures that are coming up. So you have to be knowledgeable as an educator to know, just like with stuff from Animal Farm, when I'm going to need to maybe bracket something off and tell kids they don't have to mark that, whether or not, like, if you haven't gotten to linking verb yet, like half of those Wilson sentences are linking verbs, not action verbs. So just be aware that that you will still have to analyze a little bit ahead of time what grammar constructions are showing up in any given sentence. So sometimes I'll use a page of sentences and we'll use it for a phonics goal, and we'll go through all of them for reading by syllable or whatever we're practicing for phonics. And then I'll pick certain ones to mark for grammar based on what we've learned so far. So you just have to be judicious, but there's nothing wrong with them other than that.
So Tara also has been describing what the no red ink is. Again, my big thing is if it's heavy on parts of speech, then I'm not crazy about it. But if it's very functional, then it might be useful. I don't know. Yeah. So, and I think it's always hard to have things that translate well to working on their editing skills. And so we see kids who can come in and tell us all kinds of things. They've had tons of grammar. They're amazing. They know everything. They have songs for everything. They know what everything's called. And then you'll look at a sentence they wrote and they have absolutely no idea how to edit it. They really just don't know how to apply it. So I think that's a big risk.
How it affects writing. Yes.
It's a big risk with anything unless we roll up our sleeves and get in there and do it with them, right? So it can be a way to get some good practice in, maybe. I don't know. But certainly, really having these kinds of debates and marking together, and we do it, that's the kind of thing where the real learning happens, I think.
I often tell a story where I had a student who I asked them if they knew what a noun was, and they were like, person, place, thing, activity, idea. They had this whole whatever they'd learned. And then I said, can you find the nouns in your sentence? And they could not. So that shows you that kids can learn a lot of labeling and have no application to writing or text,
right?
Which is why we focus on function.
So when using the bugs, the head is always the subject. Does this mean if we use the bugs to break down the sentence, we change the word order? You might. We're going to actually show that when you go from questions.
You may change. I think she means you may change the word order mostly in that what you're showing on the bug is just the subject, and there may have been a bunch of words before the subject that aren't being shown. But typically,
I
the
see.
order of the words across your bug should still follow the order that they appeared in the sentence, unless it's a question.
Right. Yeah. In a question, though, you actually would change the order, or you may change the order. So we are going to get to that next week.
Mhm.
So, all right. Can you briefly explain what the alien bugs are and how they're different from the sound bugs? Alien bugs is a program that is a manipulative that we use with our word study, and I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it here. We use it in our word study class and with the word study program that we sell. It's just, again, another way. We do have some videos on our Facebook page, though, don't we, Maura? Or on Instagram?
Yeah.
We have pictures and videos that do show us using alien bugs, but it's a way of showing base words plus prefixes plus suffixes and how words are built. So it's just a manipulative that we use for that.
You can see a lot of, and we're working on adding these things to our website over time, but a lot of pictures of products and descriptions and little demo videos and things are all over the Instagram. Instagram's easier to sort of scroll through than Facebook. But if you follow us on Instagram, you can go back and you can look for some of those pictures. And I often have big descriptions and explanations of what we were doing with students for those various things. It's just a good place to kind of get an idea of some things, and then you can read about them more on our website. But also, if you are not part of the Facebook group called Rooted Community, that's a free group to join. It's not closed out to anyone. You can request to join. I'll approve you, and you can ask any questions to any of our sort of longtime followers about any of our products or how things are used, and get some really detailed and great answers there. So
right. The other thing is, in our shop, if you click on alien bugs, is there a picture there? There's certainly a description. We've tried to have some pictures with some of our products. Yeah, we need to get more video up. We we just run out of time, don't we? But we're working on it. We're working toward those goals. Okay. How do we help kids remember all of the linking verbs and helping verbs? When I was young, we memorized the to be verbs as linking verbs, but I don't imagine my kids will memorize these lists, or should they?
I don't know. You might have a different answer.
What? Oh, answer live. Sorry, I didn't put that up there. Sorry. What were you going to say?
Now I can't read the question. Oh, no, I can. Okay, it's still there. Sorry. Yeah, basically, I forgot to say this today. I don't have kids do a lot of memorization of lists of things. If you focus on function, you will eventually be able to identify anytime you're seeing a linking verb because you know what it's doing. And you'll be able to identify anytime you're seeing a preposition because you know what it's doing. And anytime you're seeing a dependent clause because you know what it's doing, or a subordinating conjunction, all those things that end up with big long lists, right? Kids are going to struggle, especially struggling learners are going to struggle to remember all of those words. And quite frankly, it's a much more better use of your time to be working on identifying function by asking these functional questions. How is this acting in the sentence? Oh, it's like linking this to this. It's like saying this is that, and it's like, oh, it's like an equal sign. Oh, it's a linking verb, rather than having to be like, is, was, were, are, am, will be, like trying to remember all of those things. Kids will struggle with that. They just will. Struggling learners will. If you have a super, kid who's like good with memory and wants to memorize an entire list of prepositions or something, sure, have that. But it doesn't tend to be where my focus is, because the function kind of takes care of that if you really practice in that way.
So we're going to try to move along so that we can get through these. By the way, I am sorry we forgot to have a break. We got kind of bogged down in what we were doing. We will try to remember that next time. And if you have to leave, we understand. So Andrea says, I heard somewhere you could get away with skipping grammar until middle school when kids are more developmentally ready to engage with the topic and more mastery approach than spiral. I don't actually agree with that. Wondering if there's an age that non-struggling learners will grasp the more complicated grammar concepts the best, level 3 and up. I will tell you that none of the sentence structures we did today are beyond what a 5-year-old knows verbally.
Yeah.
Now, we gave you a heady sentence with Animal Farm, which is not literature for a 5-year-old.
Yeah, beyond what they can read, right? Sure,
But
okay.
you know, the very first time we taught this grammar class, we used a children's picture book as for our sentences, and we ended up kind of like pulling our hair out because it was so complicated. So actually, children's literature can have very complicated sentences, and children verbally will say very complicated sentences. So you really aren't working beyond what they know. It's just the material you work with. More hands-on, more functional, and sentences that they like and that are enjoyable to them and more that they can comprehend. That's what really makes a difference. Okay. So I would say I would just keep moving along as they're able. And usually the information we gave you today, I try to get under kids' belts pretty quickly, and then we spend a lot of time really learning it, right? But they kind of need some of these sentence structures under their belt so that we can do more with different sentences.
And know your learner too. If I have a student who's falling apart at something, I'm not going to be like, well, we have to get through all 3 sentence types. You know what I mean? Right. Sorry. I will stick with it for a little while.
I have older students that I stick with subject verb for a really long time. I mean, they just really struggle. So it just has to do with, not so much the age as the learner.
Exactly. And I did tell everyone too, when that question came up, I think I said, remember, we were getting through a lot of material with you today. This would be many months potentially. You could do 3 levels in a year, and that's all you did that year. Maybe just 2, like you might not have gotten through all of this even in a whole year with a student. So I just want you to know the pace of today does not equal the pace of teaching with kids.
No, absolutely.
And I think you're aware of that to some extent. But I mean, we're not talking like you do a level a week. We're not. It'd be like at most a level a month, and I would take more time than that with most kids.
Right.
So
It just depends. It depends. I might get to subject verb object more quickly,
But sometimes with an older
be there
student,
for a while.
yeah, with an older student, I might do them all pretty fast. It kind of depends. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Could we approach teaching functionally by first analyzing a sentence and examining for what is the subject and then what is the predicate, and then underline the subject and annotate the verbs, et cetera, et cetera? So
we approach teaching. Sorry, I want to read that again.
I think what she's asking is, do we start with subject? Can you start with subject predicate and then go with subject verb underlining?
So Tracy had said earlier, and she can say again, we don't tend to use the word predicate. I liked what she had said, and I wrote it down. She said the word predicate kind of hides a lot of sins in terms of what's going on in that whole second half of the sentence beyond the subject. And what functionally is happening there, the term predicate really doesn't address, which is why we don't love it, just because it avoids function. Whereas subject verb, those are the most kernel pieces of a sentence. You can have a sentence like Kanika helps, and all that's there is a subject verb, and in which case the term predicate doesn't offer a lot of meaning in terms of how is that word functioning, right? So we start with subject and verb because they really are the more basic functional pieces, and predicate doesn't really give that.
Yeah, it's just not as valuable when you're measuring by function. So, I mean, you can do it if you want to. It's just, you can do anything if you want to, but it's just not the way we prefer. That we feel, and we make these decisions based on what we think works with kids. So it's not just like, hey, Rita doesn't like that. It's that, when I do that with kids, I don't feel like it gets me anywhere. When I go about it the way we're teaching this, I feel like we make real progress. So it's really kind of based on, and, when we were at ASHA, it was funny, how many people were talking about, the fact that, grammar has to be functional, and we haven't been doing that, and it's like, so it's not just that we say it, the research is showing it, it's out there, so, all this, it just doesn't work as well to me. when I work with kids, but it might for you because you really feel like you get that. And, you know, what the teacher knows and brings to the table can make a big difference. So, okay. New to rooted in language, do all the, I think you mean laying the path classes line up. Yes, we try.
I was going through all of our abbreviations and trying to figure out what PAL stood for. Okay,
so yes, they do. We try to make them line up, but we have to tell you, this is in theory only. I have some kids who are stronger in grammar than they are in phonics, and they're stronger in word study than they are in grammar or whatever. So when you start working with kids, they really might be at one level in one area and actually in another level in another. So it's a little bit by theory, the levels go together.
But the short answer is yes, we do line them up.
Yeah, there's an attempt at that. So how do you define a sentence other than correct mechanics? If there is a subject and verb, but an incomplete thought, it's coming next Tuesday. Yeah.
So she, I think, was the one who, and Valerie, I think, also touched on this, was the whole thing about the transitive, intransitive. If you have a sentence like Rita meets, and then without, technically that has a subject and verb, but it doesn't feel like a complete thought because of that transitive verb. And so I was saying contextually, it kind of demands a direct object, even though grammatically it does have a subject and verb. So there is this idea of a whole thought that gets much more fleshed out when we talk about clauses next week. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Right. I'm still struggling to picture how this all fits into a tutoring session with a student you only see once a week, knowing when to focus on grammar, phonics, word study, comprehension, etc. I feel your pain.
Yes.
I guess you play it by ear given their strengths and weaknesses. Any other tips? The only thing I would say is what I try to do is whatever their primary area of need is. Okay, so if I have a student who's not reading at all, I'm heavy on phonics for a while. When I get them humming along, I definitely try to make sure there's a lot of home practice going on still in that area. And then I start pulling it, and I can pull word study into phonics easily, but I'll start pulling in grammar. And I will shift focus for a while so we can get a lot of good grammar work under our belt. But I can do that if they're still practicing a lot of their good phonics work and progressing there with their home program.
It's tough. It's tough.
It is tough. And the big thing is, you know, it's why we're so focused on the parent educator, because if we can't get more happening at home, 1 hour a week is not going to make a difference. My kids who make good progress, it's not just because of me.
Yep.
Right? It's because of them as workers, and it's because of their parents who are doing so much good work at home. Yep. And even, you know, I homeschooled too for a while, and I even know even with a week, I didn't feel like I could get everything done. You never can do everything you want to do. I will say this, when you're being functional, when you're going an inch wide but mile deep, then what you did teach in that time was really, really useful and valuable. So we make the most out of the time we have. We're as functional as we can. And on that,
I just wanted to say, it sounds like, you know, as from a tutoring perspective, the most parent educating you can be doing, having parents there in your sessions, engaged in practicing the kinds of strategies you're using, so that, you know, like the parent practice at home doesn't always just happen. Sometimes you have to be very involved in helping the parents be involved. And then there's other parents who like are so involved, it's like amazing, right? But sometimes you have to kind of really be working to build that parent work, that parent training.
Right. So it's as much working with parents as it is with kids. And again, that's why, you know, we started Rooted in Language, because you know, that's where the good work's really happening in all things, right? So in kids' homes really makes a difference. So I am pretty happy with where we are today, but I'm not so happy we kept you over a half hour. So, but hopefully you felt like you have some things to think on. You're not going to know it all today, but think on it, mess with it a little bit on Monday, and be ready to come back on Tuesday. Yes?
Yeah, I was going to say, any sentences we skipped, You do those for homework. Try to mark them up, because we only did about two of the practice sentences, and then the big Mondo one from Animal Farm on every practice page. So do the others for homework. And
So
tell me questions.
we will see you on Tuesday. We'll try to get the video out to those people who couldn't be here today as soon as we can. The classes are stacked pretty closely on top of each other. So just please know that, you know, if you miss one, it's likely could be that it'll be hard to, you know, hard to get it in before the next one comes. So we will see you all next week. I'm so glad. Thank you, Angela, for your comments, and
All of you guys were very
Fun,
engaged,
yeah,
which is great.
Yes, it's wonderful, Valerie and Linda. I'm just seeing the bottom few, but thank you so much, everyone. Okay, it was nice meeting with you, and we'll see you Tuesday. Bye.
Bye.